get started, okay?
Thanks. There's like 2 conferences.
Welcome, everyone. Just let everyone from the lobby in. My name is Robert. I'm with the Anchorage Coalition and Homelessness. We're going to continue waiting to let people trickle in. Thanks for coming for day 2, everybody.
Thanks, Bob. Oh, right, the function work.
Morning.
I wonder if you can see it. Can you hear us still?
Yep.
And can you see us?
Yeah. See and hear you fine.
Can you see anybody in the waiting room?
You just Sid, and I'm letting her through right now. Oh, now we got a couple more people.
Okay. Oh, so we're gonna see this. Oh. We're just gonna have pop-ups. Oh. Because now we're in.
Now you're the boss.
Yeah, thank you. We are in presenter mode. So we can, yeah, so we can see everything going on. Indeed.
Actually, is it so that you can do the PowerPoints?
Uh-huh.
Why don't we just email the PowerPoints
Do
to
you want them to click it?
Robert, and then Robert can advance them if that works okay for you
Okay.
guys? You just have to say next slide.
Sure.
Okay, give us one more second, for
Can
any
you-
technical
And
difficulty.
can you take away our co-host or presenter mode, whatever,
Will do.
then we won't see all the wonderful things. Thanks.
One more minute here and we'll kick off. With any volunteers who might want to read the land acknowledgement other than myself? People first specific language. Because when we share specific issues, we can come up with specific solutions. So we are kicking off this morning and wanted to make sure we had space for a little follow-up from yesterday, because you get a chance to sleep on things, think about them. I heard you had a lively and dynamic conversation yesterday afternoon, so I suspect there needs to be some space for some follow-up. So I'm sorry to have missed it. I can't wait to watch the recording. So I will kind of open the floor. I believe that Jessica agreed at the end of yesterday to come with some information that maybe was requested, right, about the advisory council?
Yes. I was like, oh no, I did.
Maybe we'll start there and then we can kind of just, it's meant to be organic again. So please go ahead.
Yeah, so just to follow up on the conversation yesterday, just wanted to share a little bit more about what the advisory council is, what do we do. The advisory council is the governing body for the Anchorage COC, which is the homeless prevention and response system body for Anchorage. The advisory council has responsibilities under HUD regulations to oversee and provide for a coordinated entry system, an HMIS, and also to oversee and be the rank and review body for the continuum of care funding that comes into the Anchorage COC. There is a continuum of care that is called the balance of state, which is everywhere except for Anchorage. So the Anchorage continuum of care is governed by the advisory council. We have designated lead agencies a lead agency for those activities, and that is the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness. So they are the staffer of the COC work, and then they are the organization that manages the contract with ICA for the HMIS activities. So the advisory council accepts applications on a rolling basis. We do an annual election process. So if you want to apply to be on the advisory council, right now we have one vacant seat. So accepting applications for that vacant seat, but also can submit applications at any time. And when we have vacancies, those applications come forward. We meet monthly. It's a 2-hour meeting on the 4th Thursday of every month from 3 to 5. The 3 to 4 o'clock portion is a work session for advisory council members only. And then the 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock portion is open to the public. Members of the public can register in advance for public comment. If they want to, similar to assembly meetings, they can sign up for a 3-minute period to provide public comment. They are held virtually via Zoom right now. It's fairly informal when it comes to that section of the agenda. So if somebody hasn't signed up in advance and they want to have a discussion or be part of that, it's very open to be able to have that conversation as long as we have time. And then we have typically a community presentation as part of that meeting. So this month's presentation is actually going to be a repeat of what we're hearing today about the eviction prevention. So that is an opportunity for service providers to have that information as well. But some things that we've had in the past in terms of presentations are when new projects are opening up, and we want to highlight that for other service providers, when we have challenges with a segment of the HPRS that we want to, kind of dig in and improve. Those are the kinds of topics that we have discussion about there. But open to presentation ideas. So as service providers and members of the HPRS, if you ever have suggestions or things that you would want to see as part of that meeting, you can reach out. We can see if we can make that happen. But yeah, invite everyone to attend. On the ACH website, there is a section for the advisory council, and we have recordings of all of our past meetings there. All of the minutes, any presentation documents that were part of that particular meeting, and then the governance charter, the application to be an advisory council counselor.
I'll just add that the advisory council has to have a specific makeup for federal regulation. So while you may apply, but if you don't tick one of the boxes that is missing, we may keep your application for when you would be eligible. So we try to have a representation of like a veteran, a service provider, someone from the disability community. It's a list of really, and it's something that HUD wants to make sure we have as broad of representation as possible. We've been particularly looking for people with lived experience. We think that's a really important aspect that has been missing from the advisory council. So, and just so you know the intersection a little bit, the coalition then staffs the advisory council and its committees. We go and take their guidance and their direction and go do the work. And so we very much operate in that way. So in some ways, they're like another board of directors for our agency.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I did want to talk about the committees. There are 4 committees under the advisory council: the data committee, the community prioritizations committee, the compliance committee, and the coordinated entry committee. And you do not have to be an advisory council member to serve on any of those committees. They are open to anyone who is a member of the HPRS to serve on those committees. So if you're interested in any of that work or want to attend any meetings, if you want to talk to the committee chairs about that work, let me know and we will make those connections.
Any questions about the advisory council, the role it plays? Otherwise, we'll shift back into kind of a more general Q&A. Also, we generally, if you're signed up for the coalition's weekly digest on Wednesdays, you should get notice when those meetings are coming up. If you just happen to see it the day before, even like, hey, I've got time on Thursday afternoon. I doubt many of you ever do, but if you do, then you can join us.
The one other question from yesterday, Meg, was about the hand commission. We can.
Sure. Yeah, we've got someone here from the hand commission. Can you just reintroduce yourself? And and then Robert, give me a thumbs up to make sure you can hear us okay.
I'm Elsie Crosman. Hear me?
Can you hear Elsie okay?
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Your screen went black.
And I just recently, last few months, been on the hand commission, and it's the I always forget how to say it. Anyway, it's for housing, it's homeless, and neighborhood development. And what we do is we advise the mayor and the assembly on issues related to the long and short-term housing, the homeless, and community development needs in the municipality, and strategies to affect revitalization of lower income and at-risk neighborhoods. And we have been meeting, and recently we have decided that we've been looking like the emergency shelters like everyone else but there's so much of that going on and not enough for the end result of what we need of permanent housing. And so we want to start turning our focus to that. And, you know, it was reassuring yesterday at our meeting and hearing that that is what, and agrees with this part that, you know, we need the whole pipeline process, but we need to focus on that end result because, you know, if we get them through the pipeline, but we don't have the result at the end of them, then we're right back where we started. So we're hoping to learn more and be able to make recommendations in that respect. Hope it helps.
Any discussion about the hand commission?
I would just toss out there your meeting times.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. We meet the first Wednesday of every month, and it's from 4 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. And people are welcome, and we post usually the week before our agenda and minutes, so that it's.
Are those recorded where people can go afterwards and
I
watch the recording?
know last meeting was, I don't think they always.
I think the additional question for the hand commission was, are there any, like, is there anything that someone can point to that the hand commission has moved forward or like in the past, maybe that they're like, oh, this is what the hand commission.
It's a good question, but I'm so new, I'm not
That's
so
okay.
sure I can answer that very well. I apologize.
No, that's okay. Is anybody else, I know we have some veterans in the HPRS, anybody else can point at some things or previous folks that were homeless coordinators? Nancy Burke, do you know something? The videos.
Robert, can you unmute Nancy, please? Thanks.
Nancy, you should be good to go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hi, I'm sorry, I missed. What's the question?
Can you identify any projects or, I'm sorry, we're having some video issues, so that's why you see me keep getting up. I apologize. But any projects or, yeah, I guess projects that the hand commission has put through in the past through their committee or policy that has greatly impacted the HPRS?
Oh, for sure. The Hand Commission in the past, of course, has the responsibility to review the city's allocation of the entitlement funds from HUD. And so that's, you know, at a policy level, that's an important function for the community to highlight, as Elsie just said, the focus on housing. So that's one area that I know the Hand Commission has been active in the past, and then just generally providing guidance to the assembly. There was an annual report that the commission had previously provided with recommendations, and the Hand Commission has in the past been very active in gathering recommendations from community councils about their neighborhood issues and you know, what their desire is for housing. And I think just at a policy level, that commission is can be pretty impactful.
Thanks, sorry to call on you.
That's okay. No.
Is the
Looks
hand
like
commission still where the participating jurisdiction funding plan is being heard through? So when they're making changes, what's it called? The
Consolidated plan.
consolidated plan. So do consolidated plan amendments come to the hand commission to be presented so that the public can hear what might be suggested for change? Okay.
It looks like Jed has
Got a hand there. Okay.
Let's see, well, we heard Nancy really good, so she's.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Jed,
Okay, thanks. So yeah, I can shed a little bit more light on what's going on with the hand commission recently. So I'm Jed Drolet, with the municipality, Anchorage Health Department. I manage the HUD grant application program for the entitlement programs. And the hand commission is an advisory commission to the municipality. Its sort of charter of functions, tasks it with providing advice to the mayor and the assembly on issues of housing, homelessness, and neighborhood development, which is a pretty broad remit. So its actual practical function has varied a lot over time, and it's in a bit of a transitional period right now. It has, as Meg, to answer Meg's question, yes, the hand commission traditionally and still has been one of the major forums for us to vet our planning documents when we make them. So, for a while, I was attending each meeting of the hand commission. We've had some kind of structural changes within the health department and with the relationship between the health department and the hand commission so that we're no longer quite as hand in glove. It's hand, HHAND, to answer a question in the chat there. We have not had AHD staff attending as many of the meetings recently due to some of those structural changes. But certainly whenever we do a major project, an annual action plan or consolidated plan or substantial amendment, we will bring that to the hand commission in some form. And so they, from our perspective, they kind of function a little bit as an advisory board to vet our projects and prioritizations. That's not a formal role of the hand commission. We're not required to bring things to them, but we do like to. They form sort of a broad cross section of people in the community interested and involved in these issues, and those discussions are often very useful and productive for us. That's definitely a major role. Recently, as there's been a lot of turnover on the hand commission and as the health department staff has been less involved, we're not as aware of the strategic direction that the current members are. Terry, I'm with the Anchorage Health Department. We're not as aware of the strategic direction that the new membership of the hand commission has been. I know has had a lot of discussions about. They just put out a report, sort of draft at their last meeting that has some comments that we'll be responding to about our programs. But in general, they form a really important kind of advisory function and informal vetting process for the municipality.
Thanks, Jed. That's helpful. I think those were those consolidated plan amendments in the consolidated plan. It's really important to watch. It's how it's the outline of how the municipality as the participating jurisdiction to receive HUD funding or emergency solutions grants, community development block grants, and home funds starts to outline the areas it's going to look at, and then it gets more and more specific as it's implemented. So it drives whether or not that might be a funding opportunity for your organization or for the work you're doing. So,
which that could mean like new positions, like if I'm a caseworker or case manager, how is that important to me, like the consolidated plan?
well, I think it's important in a couple of ways. One, it tells you what the municipal priorities are. I look at the consolidated plan to see, what are those priorities? Are we going to be expanding services type capacity? Or are we looking at capital investments, so facility type investments, based on kind of the fund source? In addition, I would look at that in conjunction with, other municipal funding sources for homelessness services, like the alcohol tax, and how do those things maybe work together? I think one of the things we're learning in this housing summit is there are lots of issues to be addressed. So I think we'll be trying to plan a couple more of these. One to talk specifically about funding, leveraging and braiding funding and talking about all the fund sources that are out there. And another about policy, and that policy and funding will in some ways overlap. So yeah, of course.
And I just wanted to highlight also that part of the consolidated plan is also the plan for allocation of ESG funds, which is emergency shelter grant funds. And under HUD regulations, it is required that the planning for those funds be coordinated with the COC. So it is really important that we watch the ESG funds and that be a coordinated conversation between the COC and the Anchorage Health Department, well, the municipality of Anchorage, on how those funds are allocated and how they're being prioritized and how that ties to the strategic plan to end homelessness.
More hand or COC questions? Otherwise, let's just open it up for any follow-up from yesterday. Including maybe something we didn't touch on and don't plan to touch on that like you might want to. I mean, there's no right or wrong.
I just wanted to put in another plug for the consolidated plan. We are actually working on a new consolidated plan right now, and we are open to any and all input and feedback that people have. The consolidated plan itself is actually a 5-year sort of strategic plan that defines what our goals are for the types of programs and projects we're going to fund. We have a survey on our website. I'm working on putting together an online version that people can just click through. But for now, there's a Word document. And so one way that this is important to you guys is that you are important stakeholders in that planning process, and your input on the types of projects we should be focusing on is a really crucial component of doing this plan. So, if you have ideas about what types of projects you would like to see over the next 5 years, the municipality fund through these HUD entitlement programs, now is the time. Get in touch with me. I'm going to be reaching out to a lot of people individually to get consultation and input from various directions on that plan. And then within each consolidated plan, each year there's an annual action plan that lays out the specific projects that we'll be doing within those priority goals. And so also, if you're aware of specific projects or programs, it can be services as well. It doesn't have to be infrastructure projects, although a lot of it is. If you have specific ideas for projects or programs, also reach out to me and we can incorporate those into the annual action plans as well as the broader strategic plan. That's the con plan.
Thanks, Jed. Could you put the link to where people can find that stuff in the chat? We're gathering all the.
I will do that.
As the
I will do that.
sources. Thank you.
I think, what was the other, those were the only two major ones from yesterday. Other than, because we're gonna have Victor here later, I think, for the condemned building conversation, the inspector,
Oh,
the building inspector, I think he's coming at 11. So I think if you're okay with waiting for that question.
Then, yeah, so maybe what we'll do is go ahead and move on to our first presentation, and then we'll have some more space maybe after before we turn to lunch, and then we can do it that way. So, all right, we are ready to share, Robert, the eviction diversion program, right? Is that the right
Yes.
word? Sorry, I put prevention, my fault, from the court system presentation. Great, and I'm really excited to have Will here. Big shout out to our staff member, Helen, who's been working to help stand this project up alongside the court system. And I believe Nancy Burke and others, really collaborative effort. So we're really excited to learn about it. And I'm thinking it's gonna be a game changer, folks. So, no, not too much pressure. Good luck. We'll get it up there just 1 second.
Can anyone see the presentation up?
No.
Okay, let's try. Here we go.
There we go. Yep. You just go into presentation mode. We should be good to go.
Okay.
I'm just gonna try to make it bigger on this end, but go ahead.
I apologize. Give me 1 second. Trying to figure out how to put it into presentation mode. There we go. Excellent.
Perfect. And thank you for the introduction, Meg. And I'm really appreciative of Meg and the Anchorage Coalition and Homelessness to have me both here for the summit overall and as a presenter to talk about our new eviction diversion program and the work we're doing at the Alaska court system. As I was introduced, I'm Will Walker. I'm the staff attorney and grant facilitator at the court working on this new eviction diversion program. Next slide. So just as an overview, so the Alaska court system was one of 12 courts to have received a grant from the National Center for State Courts. We're the only one to be operating the program statewide. And so these grants were made for courts to either begin or continue eviction diversion programs. And so kind of our model is using mediation as a core component and making that available to landlords and tenants both before and after a formal eviction case is filed. And we'll be using volunteer mediators to do that, comprised of law clerks, former judges and justices, professional mediators are among the volunteers who we've recruited so far. We're also kind of proposing some provisional court rule changes that I'll talk about in just a little bit to help facilitate the program. Next slide. So kind of the mediation component kind of is maybe the central formal component, but I see there as being these additional program components as well that I think are essential to the program functioning overall. So first, outreach. In order for the program to work, people need to know about it. And so I think a key aspect is working with service providers and members in the community and getting the word out to landlords and tenants that the program exists, that's available, as well as building trust in the community. We recognize that when many people hear the court system, lots of court system, that might not elicit the most positive feelings. And so kind of developing that trust and relationship that, this program is something that is meant to help people is something that we'll be working on and hope to work with the service providers and members in the community on. And so developing those relationships with you all, with landlord groups, mediation groups, attorneys, and other stakeholders in the community, we see as very essential. Another major component is the legal information aspects and improving the accessibility and availability of legal information through the court's webpage and resources, because the better informed that people are about the eviction process, about landlord-tenant law, the better equipped they are to, at any stages of the process, ideally to kind of avoid, even getting notice to quit or getting to a formal eviction case in the first place, but to be prepared if they are to go to mediation, if they are to go to an eviction hearing, that they're better equipped to know what the law is, what the process looks like. And so kind of improving those resources on our website, going to be building guided interviews, creating videos and trying to, make all that information accessible, as well as working with Alaska Legal Services on kind of the legal advice component that the court can't give, but helping to connect people with the legal advice component. And so we've been working closely with Alaska Legal Services on that, and we'll be referring people to the landlord tenant helpline and their intake line as well. Thirdly, I kind of see my role as being kind of a triage component as people are coming through and interacting with our program, in that respect, being able to connect them with the resources and services that they need in the community, in trying to help identify those as they come through the core process. Next slide. Here are some of the provisional rule changes that we've proposed. So again, kind of the outreach and letting people know about the program is going to be a major component. So one of the rule changes, or a couple of them, will be requiring the landlords to provide information about the program at a few different steps in the process. So I'll hand out these for you all to look at, what we have now. And so these are information sheets that talk about the process, what's kind of going on at these different stages. So the notice to quit stage, as well as the kind of formal eviction case stage with the notice, with the complaint and summons, which is when the case is actually started in court. And so these sheets kind of provide that information about the process, and then kind of different action items, things that they can do, referrals or to the court's website, to Alaska Legal Services, and then to the program itself and our intake form. Another one of the requirements will be landlords to file the tenant's contact information when they start a case, so we can reach out to the tenants when an eviction has been filed against them, so we can let them know about the program and encourage their participation. In case I didn't mention at the beginning, it is a voluntary program, so we need the buy-in from both the landlords and tenants. And so we hope to encourage on both sides the participation, and encourage people to see kind of the benefits of mediating their conflict, which I'll get to more on the next slide. Another component in provisional rule change will be removing from the public access version of court view tenants and cases if the case is closed without an eviction. And that'll only be at this point prospective. I think we'll have it from like January 1st, cases open since January 1st of this year. But hopefully that will be, an important aspect, because if people are able to resolve their situations without, again, getting an eviction, we don't think that should be counting against them and being used against them down the line. And I don't need to tell you all about the impacts of that. And then just kind of for completion's sake, like another aspect is just another rule is just having that the mediations to the program are confidential, just since there's no statutory language on that as is. And for those on the Zoom, you can see the kind of information sheet there on the slide, and we've passed around some versions here in the room. Next slide. So one question we get is why mediate, especially from people ask, okay, what's the incentive for the landlord? So the first one of these, as you all know, the negative ramifications of getting an eviction on your record and the impact that can have on finding housing down the line and the availability of public housing and other resources. And the impact of that on the community. But in addition to that, which, primarily benefits the tenant, but I think also benefits the community and landlords as well. I think for both parties, mediating can save time and money instead of needing to hire an attorney and kind of pay the court fees and go through the court process. Being able to potentially resolve the issue in a less formal setting can reduce some of those costs. It's easier and less stressful than the formal eviction process. Most people don't want to be spending their time in court going to eviction hearings. And I think landlords included in that. Mediations also provide the space for parties to find creative solutions to their problems and resolutions that wouldn't be possible through the court system. The court is relatively limited with, like the resolutions that they can do. It's, who has possession of the unit, the tenant or the landlord, and then the monetary damages component. Whereas through mediation, there's kind of a greater possibility space for the parties to find something that can work for them. And that kind of also keeps party autonomy, that, both sides are able to, again, in a little bit less of a formal environment, be able to share their perspectives, what their interests are, and, kind of try to work with the other side to reach an agreement. And so this is how you all can help, and I see it more as like how you can help us help you all. So first is kind of spreading the word and letting people know about the program and referring landlords and tenants to us if they're going through any of these situations, if they're a landlord thinking about eviction, if it's a tenant who's received a notice to quit, or a summons and complaint for an eviction case. And then if you are a landlord, or if your organization acts as a landlord for people, please use our program as one of the tools in your toolkit. I know, especially the people on this call, eviction, and for most landlords, evictions are kind of like the last step. But we hope that people in the community are using us as another tool, as another opportunity to try to get a neutral third party in the room to help dialogue between both sides. Another essential aspect, kind of as I mentioned, I see myself as kind of triaging between and referring people to services and resources available. In order to do that, I kind of need to know what resources are available and kind of what the criteria are for people to qualify, and who would be the best people to send, make referrals to. Especially, we talked yesterday a little bit about the rental cliff that's upcoming. So I know we don't have, from my understanding, any major lumps of rental assistance right now, but to my understanding, there might be occasionally, smaller funds available. And so if we know about that at the core, then we can help share that when people are going through the mediation program and have that available as a resource. Help finding housing and those sorts of services, because even if people are able to maybe avoid an eviction, they might still be agreeing to a move out date. And so trying to help bridge the gap from their old housing to new housing without them being left in a homelessness situation. Help like moving transportation, financial programs, ready to rent, social services, mental health services. You all know better than me what all the needs might look like for people who are facing eviction and are kind of like bridging between maybe their old housing situation and a new one. And so the better equipped we are at the core to connect people with the resources, hopefully the better the outcomes are, most importantly for the individuals going through these situations. And so kind of aligned with that is, if I can get connected with intake staff at your programs to talk about the best way to make referrals to your organizations, that'd be really helpful. We want to be making good referrals. We want to make sure to not be wasting people's time. And so the better idea we have of like what the intake criteria are and what the capacity is of your organization, the better those referrals can be. And hopefully we can make the process as smooth as possible for the individuals. And again, I think the legal information component is big. So as on the ground, as you're seeing, questions, as you're seeing misconceptions potentially, if you let us know that, we can try to prioritize those aspects as we're, providing information on the website. I'd love to hear, what people are confused about, what questions people ask, and we want to, be responsive to those questions. And likewise, we'd love to, as we go, hear feedback. I see it as an iterative process and continuing to try to improve things and make the program responsive to the needs in the community. And so hearing people's feedback and thoughts is something that we really value. Next slide. And so happy to answer questions now. I have my email address on there and happy to share it with anyone here in person too, for any of those aspects.
Michael would like to know, well, first he thanked you, but he would also like to know the best way to contact and connect with the program.
Yeah, so my email address is right there, so feel free to reach me at any time. We're we'll be launching the webpage very, very soon. Hopefully in the coming days and weeks. We'll have the webpage up, and that'll be, through the court website. I guess that for the handouts here, they have QR codes. As I said, the website isn't live yet, so those won't go through to the ultimate program page at this point. But we will have a program page, and sort of how the process will look like eventually, or once it's up. We'll have like an intake form, and people can either call me or fill out the form, and I'll contact them, or whether it's a tenant or a landlord contacting us, reach out to the other party to let them know about the program, let them know that the other side is interested in participating in mediation, hopefully getting that buy-in from the other side, and then we'll be matching them with the volunteer mediators and trying to conduct that mediation as soon as possible, and hopefully within a positive resolution. Thanks for your question, Michael. Harry?
Thanks, Will. I've just seen like a whole collective vision, like moving towards like making it a policy that there is this whole process going on in mediation first. And like that would be a really good vision that I'm seeing. And I'm questioning here is like, how many mediators do we have available in Anchorage itself? People who do that mediation work. I don't know if you know that number or anything like that. That would like really eliminate all kinds of stress and strain in our county if there are people who did that work that people could go access. When I was in Portland, I had a whole organization. I was part of a municipality that did conflict resolution. If it was our neighbor, or was any other entity who wanted to participate, they could go and get that as a free service. And that was Portland. We're in Anchorage. So and the only place I see active mediation work is happening with one of the Native Corporation developments, and I keep misnaming it, the Cook Inlet something. So that was a question here about where are the mediators or the mediation skills and a recognition of mediation as a possibility in the whole thing. That is my question.
Yeah, so so we don't have the funding for the program for like paid mediators. We are working with some of the professional mediators in Alaska who've been willing to volunteer, and some who are doing some of the trainings for our volunteer mediators. Again, it's a statewide program, so we have people volunteering from all over the state. Again, we have a lot of law clerks and former judges and justices, and professional mediators who are doing that. And many are based in Anchorage, but also statewide. And I know, I think, so I'm located within the Access to Justice unit of the court, and I think we see, like alternative dispute resolution mediation as a really positive opportunity for, it's involved. We have possibilities in other kind of areas of law too, but we're kind of limited based off of capacity and everything. But would love to, see an increased focus on alternative dispute resolution mediations as an option in a variety of cases. That's responsive. Anything I didn't have?
Yeah, thanks.
Laura's hand.
Does a landlord need to file the initial eviction paperwork first in order to utilize this program, or does this program come prior to that initial file?
It can come at any point during the process. I mean, we also hope to have resources available even like day of eviction hearings for people if the parties are willing at that point to still talk before kind of the judge hears the case. But to your question on the earlier side, it'd be available before. We're kind of talking internally about some of the stuff because there will be kind of like legal aspects that we might encourage the landlords to still like give a notice of quit or something, because if the agreement winds up not being followed, they still need to have, if they then would want to proceed with an eviction case, they still need to have like those legal requirements, including the notice of quit, met. So while it wouldn't like, so we're talking through internally like how we want to handle that. It's not necessarily like, we don't necessarily want to like encourage people giving notice of quits, but we also don't want the landlords to be turned off from the program if they, like participate and reach an agreement and then feel like they're put at a disadvantage from having participated or something like that. Any questions online?
No, not quite yet, but if anyone has any, please shoot them into the chat.
Looks like you have a hand, Robert.
What?
Looks like you have a hand up. Somewhere along in the participants. Yeah, it's a lot of screens.
And if you're in presenter mode, it's hard to see the hand.
If you've got your hands up, maybe identify
Maybe,
yourself.
yeah.
They can't unmute. Oh, never mind.
It is Jennifer Beardsley, if I'm saying it right. And you might have to unmute her, and you can stop right there, yeah. Stop presenting, there you go.
There you go, Jennifer, you're unmuted and I'll spotlight you. Sorry about that.
I think the mute went back, Robert, or something.
She has to unmute herself.
Jennifer, go ahead and unmute yourself. You've been given permission. Let me try it again. Okay, Jennifer, try again.
Might have to read from the chat. Yeah, that's a great
Yeah,
idea.
no worries. Jennifer says, I don't seem to be able to unmute. Let's do, see if we can. Okay, Jennifer, go ahead and try again. And if it doesn't work this time, we might need to get you to leave the meeting and come back in. Or put your question into the chat. One of the two. Okay. Jennifer, try okay, I am going to. Okay, Jennifer says she was wondering, Will, if you could speak to removing records from court view.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly something that we recognize as an issue. I think right now we're kind of limited by like what authority we have. So we have authority from like basically from the state Supreme Court to as part of the program do provisional court rules. And so that's what the basis for how we've been proposing the ones that I went over. But I think for anything more significant or longer lasting or retroactive going back, we might need broader authority than what we have. But it's certainly something that we will want to keep in mind because we recognize the importance of the records on court view. But we also want to make sure that we're following, acting within the parameters that we have and are doing something that we'll be able to still build support and buy-in from all the stakeholders.
I think is fascinating about this program is that I look at it as another layer. So I think a lot of folks who already run housing programs try to mediate between or landlords and tenants, or if you are the landlord, you're already trying to work with the tenant. So like this is just, okay, the landlord is like, I'm gonna just have to file, like I'm at that point. Then it's handed off to maybe this third independent party, this mediator, which I think gives you some space. So I think that's a really cool thing that we have kind of like our own opportunities and then this other space. I also feel like it helps level the playing field a little bit. Most landlords are represented. And it's really intimidating. It's really intimidating to get official documents with no help to read them. So I'm really excited to see how this will play out. I'm actually concerned that the request will exceed the capacity of the program very quickly. That's my concern, is that everyone will like really want to try to take advantage of this, because no one likes to go through an eviction. Landlords don't like to do it. Tenants certainly don't like to do it. And so I'm really concerned that, yeah, it will be a capacity issue very quickly.
Yeah, we'll have to like see what the level of like demand versus maybe the supply essentially of like the volunteer mediators and what their time capacity is like as we go and can do additional recruitment for mediators if needed.
So evictions usually move pretty fast.
Yeah.
So does this, if the parties agree to enter into this process, does it just slow things down so that there's time to see if there's the volunteer available and kind of move through the process? Or is it that the volunteer capacity has to keep up with the pace and timing of an eviction proceeding?
Probably the latter. At this point, like there's we don't have the authority and there's no provision to like slow down the process through it. I mean, still it's voluntary. So if it's before the filing, they still, depending on the willingness of especially the landlord, they might, like be willing to like let the mediation run its course before filing a case. But it is a quick moving process, and especially in Alaska, as I said, we're part of a cohort of 12 other courts in different jurisdictions. And we met last month. It struck me just like how much faster the Alaska process was. Certainly in practice than it seemed like in all the other jurisdictions where it took a lot more time.
I don't, but I have one more question. Is that okay? Okay. Do you think judges will refer people to this program? So sometimes, judges get parties before them and they're like, come on, folks, I think you might be able to work this out. Is it contemplated that that will be a mechanism as well for a judge to say, hey, could you guys both agree to go through this thing over here? And
I think so, at least in the like informal sense. I don't again, it's a voluntary program, so I don't think it'd be necessarily like mandated by the court. But and I think we've seen that the judges, especially here in Anchorage, and the judges we've talked to across the state, have been A, supportive of the program, but B, I think have been trying to encourage parties to find a resolution short of a hearing already. I listened to a bunch of the eviction hearings in Anchorage for the first few months I started, and they often ask, how do the parties, take time to see if they can come to a resolution and that sort of stuff, and sometimes even align them time like day of the hearing. Although, as you mentioned, especially at that stage, the landlords often are represented. It's day of the eviction hearing, so kind of the like bargaining power and the power dynamics are even more in favor of the landlord at that point. But we have gotten a lot of buy-in from judges here and across the state who have been interested in the program, and I think would be very willing to at least like let people know that this is an option and encourage parties to participate.
Laura,
I think we have a question in the.
you're all in line.
Will service providers be able to participate in the mediation on behalf of clients, especially if there's a need for reasonable accommodation?
Maybe if there's like a need for reasonable accommodation, generally, so mediations are seen as like confidential, and so it's usually like the parties and the mediator. I think if it's a reasonable accommodation sort of situation, that's probably a different scenario. But
what about those who are on voucher programs where the service provider is actually paying for the rent themselves, and there might be like a third-party contract or a master lease involved with the service provider?
Could you explain what the master lease?
So So some organizations choose a leasing type style of program where the service provider is actually leasing the unit from the landlord. And then they enter into an occupancy agreement or a sublease with their tenant whom they're subsidizing the rent for. So in those cases, kind of a three-party kind of deal as far as the rental piece goes.
What would happen, like, if an eviction case is brought in that situation? Are they like a party to that or what?
I mean, I think essentially they would be because the landlord would have to actually be evicting the service provider as well as the individual or the client who has sublet that unit from the service provider.
In fact, they should serve it on the service provider and not the actual client in the unit.
And I think that's, I mean, we don't have very many of those because of that, but I think there are scenarios in our community where we still do.
I think in how it has to be filed though, is it has to be all occupants in the units, so your tenants would still be listed on the actual eviction request. So everybody essentially should be at the table.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like, the service provider would be both like a party in the ultimate litigation if it is litigated, and thus would be, a party that should be in the room.
Otherwise,
I'd have to check it for like the other situations, but in general, it would typically be between the parties themselves.
You've answered my question. You can go to Bob.
In terms of Nancy Britt, and Orange to comment on what Will just said.
Given that most tenants are gonna be pro se, could you require with the service and process rule or whatever that this be included with it, considering it on the tenant as part of the rules?
Could you repeat that?
So you have to serve a summons and complaint on the tenant.
Yes.
Does the rule require that this be served with it then?
Yes, so one of these will be with the summons and complaint. And then one with the pre-information or the pre-filing one will be with the notice to quit. Yes.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. I missed that. Thank you.
is that across the board for all landlords in the municipality or only those who choose to participate in the program?
This is across the board as like a new court rule for landlords who are like pursuing an eviction basically, and across the state, not just Anchorage. Nancy, do you have your hand up?
I do. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. I just wanted to weigh in on the master lease situation. In all of those leases I'm aware of, those are leases that are supporting persons who either are exiting homelessness or have a disabling condition. And I would suggest that those landlords, and will be coordinating on things. If anything like that comes across, those folks should be referred to the LHP because we should be negotiating mutual terminations of the lease rather than evictions for those situations. The master lease is really set up for people who need extra support, and I understand there are probably some circumstances where an eviction needs to happen, but we should be trying to avoid those at all costs.
Thank you.
I think the other thing I found really neat about like this little pamphlet, and hopefully, I think you said it's online, so others that are online, or should we like?
It will be, so once we have the basically the links that we can put in for the QR codes, we'll be able to post it as like one of the forms, and we'll be including these on the court provided examples of the notices to quit and the summons, so that for landlords who use our forms, that'll be easy for them. Not every landlord uses our forms, some do their own, but they'll still, under the new provisional rules, will be required to give them to the tenants regardless. But yeah, those will be within the like form section once we get the links and then get these finalized.
And I think we might be able, for the purposes of the summit, somebody can tell me if I'm wrong, scan it so everybody online, the 69 folks can have access to the same thing that people had in the room too.
Scan it and include it in the after.
With the resources. Thank you. The other thing is if I was doing direct service and my case management was ending like in 6 months, I would really be like, hey, Johnny, I know our services are ending. If you find yourself in trouble, hopefully you can call me, and here is this thing, because this is something that if you're feeling like you're getting to the point with your landlord, you want to reach out to these folks. So it might be a great case management tool, and that's the first thing I thought of. But I don't do direct send. Every time, every time.
Coalition is not a direct service.
Thank you. If y'all learned anything from the summit, that's the thing. So. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Well, at some point, we're gonna ask you to come back to tell us how it's going. We realize this is at the startup, but we're really interested. I hope you guys are gonna keep some data on, hopefully evictions that, never filed because of it, and then maybe evictions diverted. Like, filed, but with that intervention, because it'll be really interesting to see for us in particular, if there's a change once it's filed, if that seems to be the catalyst that gets something rolling that can't be stopped even with the program versus just those that aren't filed. So we can then really tailor our interventions to match, and complement the court's interventions. Also, we can just give, the number one thing we need to do here is always make sure we're giving people accurate, real information, even if it's bad news. And if it's like, yeah, it's filed, you could try this, but the chances of success are pretty low. So I hope you're making other plans versus, oh, your landlord's agreed to do before ever filing. Great news, because everyone, we're seeing this happening. So it's always really good for us to give people context and good information. Is Alaska Legal Services still representing tenants who can't afford help with evictions? Do you know?
I mean, I would refer to Jennifer. She's still here for that. I mean, it's still, I'm sure, like a capacity issue for them. I know they have volunteers working on the landlord tenant helpline. Yeah, so I'm not sure what their capacity is for full representation for tenants.
And one of the reasons I ask is Laura brought up a great issue is, particularly tenants who need accommodations. It may be that you can't avoid the eviction, but you can get more time for the client to move. That's really big, especially if you need an accessible apartment or other particular things. So that's the first thing I thought of was how do, if you can't avoid it, how do you get the space so that the person has a reasonable chance to move? Hopefully into a place so they don't come back, return to homelessness. That's a big one for us, obviously.
Like, just in the same vein of what you were saying, I would be also interested in knowing, for the cases that do continue on with the eviction process after they have done the mediation and work with the program. Just knowing what were those factors or the metrics of why it wasn't able to be resolved and bringing that back. So again, we can do some more planning and just figure out what else is the need. I mean, we know funding is probably the biggest thing, along with housing and other barriers to that, but it would be interesting to see and just have that data.
Yeah, absolutely. And for both of y'all's points, I see that as something I'm hopeful about with the program is, like seeing some of the data and being at like kind of the central point in the process, and then hopefully being able to identify both like needs and service gaps as people like move through, but then also kind of on the procedural aspect and seeing, okay, like what are some of the underlying like causes for like when things don't work, and like is there anything that can be done there? And I think we recognize, and one of the reasons why we're kind of emphasizing is trying to do pre-filing is like I think we all recognize that interventions as early in the process as possible are more ideal than later, and there's more opportunity to resolve things. If the tenants are working with the landlords at the first sign of there being an issue, that's more easily resolved than waiting to the day of the eviction or something else. But then, as you're saying, identifying kind of the needs, the gaps, the issues, so then we can see as a community what are those needs that are being unmet, and then what can be done. And as you said, funding is going to be like a limiting factor, but identifying those and seeing what can be done to meet those.
Yeah.
And Robert, when you're speaking, you're pretty low. I just wanna, we're not ignoring you, but I just, okay. Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, all right. There's some good discussion going on in the chat. Anne Marie, from the lead coordinator here at McKinnell House, says, I'm curious if it might be a possibility to create an eviction re-education type program or class where tenants with previous evictions can reserve certificates to present to future landlords, showing that they have learned how to be more effective tenants. Possibly circumventing the immediate need to have the eviction removed from court view.
I mean, I think that sounds like a great idea, and I think, I'd be willing to help out with what we can. If that's something that landlords would find valuable, and again, I mentioned is, if we can be connecting people with resources, and we talked yesterday about some of the, I forget what the term, but the renters kind of ready to rent, yes. So, if those sorts of programs can be accessible to, people, that we can refer them to, and if there could be some sort of certification or something, if that's something that landlords would like, yeah, I think that'd be great.
I think are kind of building up in our community, so that's definitely going to be a resource.
Maybe we need to keep Will in the loop about ready to rent, and so that that brings them to mediation.
Yes, please, especially if it sounds like right now they're on the earlier stages and accessible to people within the particular organizations or programs, but to the extent that they can be available to other people as they're coming through the court process in our program, love to be able to connect them with that, because again, I see the program and like our stage in the process is hopefully being able to bridge people and hopefully helping them find more permanent housing moving forward and addressing any of the underlying issues that might make it more difficult for people to be rented.
Interesting piece of the puzzle I've not heard anyone talk about in this situation is, we work really hard to get landlords to take vouchers and, but also letting them know what an eviction does to someone's eligibility to move and use that rental subsidy somewhere else. And I think that might be some partnership with Alaska Housing Finance Corporation, but like really being clear that an eviction isn't just this person can't live in your place, that this person now loses a substantial benefit that's probably keeping them from being homeless. So I don't have a strategy for it. It's a thought and it's a consideration. And I don't think landlords have much visibility into that issue. I think they're like, we did all this work to be able to take this thing, and now it's not working out. So I feel really burned. However, they don't understand the gravity of the consequences.
Do have a hand online, and then I also wonder if you wanted to hear from Jennifer with the Alaska Legal Services team. So there you go, Robert. Turned it over to you.
Okay. S. Rhodes, I've allowed you mic access. Go ahead with your question.
You just have to unmute.
Yeah, you've got the power to unmute. Go for it.
Nope, she's not being able to.
I think Owen had to figure this out yesterday too, right?
Yeah,
The
but if
conference
we
room.
can put it in the chat quick.
Stephanie, do you think you could put it in the chat for now, and then we're gonna try to figure out how to unmute everybody like we did after lunch yesterday? It's a process. While we're waiting for Stephanie's question, and it sounds like we won't be able to hear from Jennifer if we can't get her to unmute either. But we do have the
Okay.
Sasha, do you think you got it, Robert?
Yeah, I just turned on I just turned off the auto mute, so everyone should be able to participate as called upon. Go ahead and try again.
No. You said space bar?
Is that only on Zoom now, or is it on? Is it on Teams?
Do you think?
Stephanie, if you hit your space bar, does it unmute you?
No.
Bummer.
She's like, I tried that.
Oh,
wait, it did it. Oh, but it's. Yeah, they're all like, no, no, no. It's got to be a setting, but we hope to figure this out definitely after lunch so we can hear people online, if not now. And then, so on Monday, we do have Sasha, you have the graphic for the MLK legal. Oh, I heard somebody.
I think it unmuted.
Oh, yes, it did. Whoever's talking.
I was like, Jennifer?
This is Jennifer Beardsley.
Yay. Oh,
It,
there we go.
it did unmute. The only thing I was going to say is I made a point about guardians. There are a lot of tenants that show up who are unrepresented and they have guardians and they can't actually agree to anything themselves legally. So one of the things the mediation program should probably do is have some kind of checklist about that for people who are seriously disabled. And the only other thing I wanted to add as a judge who did landlord-tenant things every single day is that there are landlords whose property's been damaged and they're like, I'm going to stand between this person and any other landlord having this problem. And so property damage is really something that somehow needs to get addressed if mutual terminations are going to be an option.
Thanks for that, Stephanie. And I think that was part of the impetus for the risk pool and the landlord housing partnership. We've seen that continues to be something, if we can help at least provide some assurance that that property damage will be taken care of. It's helpful.
Yeah, and I've talked with the folks at the Landlord Housing Partnership about hopefully having that pool as an available resource that as people are coming through the mediations, that could be an opportunity if damage to the property is one of the aspects, if that can be one of the factors that can help keep someone in their housing, then especially having that pool available. So thanks for both of those points, Stephanie.
I was just gonna say on the pool and stuff, because they told us, like, I think the limit's like 5,000. I'm gonna say it wrong, but I'm gonna say the limit is an amount. So just be careful, because we've had other organizations say, yeah, they'll pay for all damages, and then they do like $10,000 in damages. Like, they will not pay for all damages. So just make sure you're very clear with verbiage. And then the ready to rent, because I know a lot of people talked about it. I just asked how much, because we just paid for a newer employee to go through and become a trainer. It was $550 or $575. So it's not crazy, but then that person has trained our entire team. So it's very much worth it for any organization to get that.
And they also come with booklets and PowerPoints, like everything you need comes with the training. So then you just go to the copier and just, go crazy.
And then we've uploaded photos of that apartments, which helps us. PowerPoint's great.
Jennifer, you got your hand up again?
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that somebody mentioned tenants or clients that need reasonable accommodations, and I'm part of the Fair Housing Project, and those clients should definitely be referred to legal services if they need reasonable accommodations and they're going through the eviction process. We do representation for those individuals, and I would be interested in getting calls from them if they qualify for our services and are low income. Even if they're over income, we can help them in the Fair Housing Project. So any client, I'd be happy. I'd put the number in the comments.
Thanks, Jennifer. Can you talk just briefly about what happens when someone calls? Because us being able to explain to clients the process once they call, I think is really important. Is it going to be some kind of intake and then they'll get back to you? Is it like, can you just talk a little bit about what happens once you pick up the call?
They leave a message and then an intake person calls them back and does the basic intake of getting the information about what the problem is, getting their name, making sure we don't have a conflict, their basic financial information. And then 3 times a week, we have a housing team meeting to take in the cases on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And then it's assigned and we call them. And with eviction cases, we try to go very quickly. And when it's a fair housing issue, such as a reasonable accommodation, we call them back rather quickly. It's just that our intake line is rather backed up right now due to the SNAP crisis. We're getting we've had over 100 SNAP calls in the first 9 days of the year. And, you know, if you look at 2021, we had like less than 100 in the whole year.
Thanks for that, Jennifer. It's really good for us to tell someone when we give them a number, you're gonna leave a message, so they're not expecting a live person on the other end or that they're going to get immediate help. And so that was why I was asking. I really appreciate that.
Yes.
Speaking of legal services, I want to make a little plug here. So Monday is free legal help at the Boys and Girls Club in Mountain View from noon to 2 and 2 to 4 for anything except criminal cases. It's the Martin Luther King free legal, I guess it's the Martin Luther King Day Legal Clinic. They do family law, child support, custody, guardianship, divorce, housing, eviction, foreclosure, allotments, public benefits, Medicaid, Social Security, Medicare, and then other types of things, employment, estate planning, you know. So if you have clients who've been in need or maybe have been putting an issue off, the only downside to that day is there is no public transportation because the buses are not running due to the holidays. So, but if your folks can get there, all you have to do is queue up. They'll go through the intake process, and there are a bunch of really great lawyers there ready to help them. I believe it's about a 20-minute appointment. And if you had a client who would need help, as long as the client consents to be there and talk with the lawyer, it's totally fine. And that's one of those opportunities. Case managers often accompany folks to that.
The infographic for that should be in the chat, and then we'll put it up on the screen here and maybe print off a couple if you guys don't know about that, so you can bring it back to your offices. We're only here till 2.
I know you mentioned there's gonna be some housing help there. Would that include like security deposits? I specifically work with someone that needs help with that.
It would be legal
Like
help.
obtaining theirs, okay.
Yeah, so how to obtain your security deposit
Yes.
back? Yes, they could get advice about that. Yeah. Any other? Oh, go ahead, Robert, sorry.
Aaron would like to go back to job development and support from yesterday's conversation. If there's not a comment on the discussion that just proceeded. Are there tenants who have an expressed interest or experience in maintenance that could focus on repairs for apartments who are engaged in the landlord housing program?
This directed at me. I'm not sure specifically, but I think that's like one of the opportunities with like mediation or something, is some getting like resolutions or something outside of the, you know, like again, what would be possible through a formal court proceeding.
Nancy, are you on to answer if whether or not there's any kind of synergy there?
I am, and this was a topic that we touched on yesterday, that the landlord housing partnership is not going into employment at the moment. We have talked about potentially making resources available to landlords, you know, we've actually talked about businesses across the community. We haven't touched on the idea of creating a pool of trained folks, but I think there's other partners who do that work, like Cook Inlet Tribal Council, 9 Star. I think we would rely on partners who understand that business line of employment for tenants. That's not really our lane, but we would be open to any connections or ideas. That sounds exciting.
Aaron, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to derail from the conversation. I thought the presentation was pretty awesome. Well, I think I've met you in the past, by the way. And so it's good to see you. And I appreciate that the courts have this type of support for mediation amongst landlords and tenants. Being a tenant years ago myself, that's probably would have been helpful with some circumstances, but just all in all, just thinking about like the incentives and maybe for landlords, and I understand that that's their property and they run it according to housing laws, and then it is their property, so they can run it how they wish. Just thinking about like the steps towards getting to mediation, and prior to that, and me just being very limited in familiarity towards these discussions, that this is my first time being at the summit meeting. Is there resources available for landlords to kind of walk them through that process before they get to the situation where they're no longer, like, this is no longer viable for them and the tenant? And I may have missed that yesterday because I did have to step away for a different meeting, so I apologize if this is something that was already discussed, but I'm just thinking about like that process of getting from like, this is, we've made an agreement, to now it's just for whatever reason, I can't house you here. So, and I do apologize, this is a repetitive question, but just with regards to the presentation this morning, I was just thinking about like, what are the measures before we get to the court system? And again, thank you, Will, for the presentation and for the court's ongoing support within the community to try to make things equitable for everybody.
Thanks, and thanks for your question. So that's part of the legal information component that I think, like, there are some resources available for both landlords and tenants on the court's website now, but I hope to like keep improving them. It's not the most easily understood in the current form, I would say, and so I'm hoping to make it more accessible and like have create some of these like guided interviews that can walk both landlords and tenants through the process. I think there are also like resources externally available. I think there's a private landlord attorney who has a website. I don't know what the name is offhand, that has some of like the information about what the process looks like from the landlord kind of plaintiff side. But yeah, that's something that we want to, I think the legal information component is super important on both sides, because I think the better that both landlords and tenants know what their rights and responsibilities are, I think the better for everyone. And so trying to make that again more accessible and, you know, educate people in the community about both of those, I think would be beneficial overall and at each stage in the process.
Thank you, Will.
Landlord tenant conversation. Not seeing anything here. Okay, let's turn back to the other topic that was raised, Robert. And then will we be joined soon by the code enforcement individual? Okay, great.
Sorry, Meg, which topic?
You mentioned that someone wanted to go back to a previous topic after we were done with landlord tenant.
That was Aaron's first comment about the landlord housing program.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
I did have a previous topic that I failed to mention. So yesterday we had some questions of like, some of us understand the HPRS and others don't. So Sasha, can you share the graphic? There's this, and sometimes it's nice to see it. You're all a part of the HPRS, but we'll wait till the graphic. It's coming. So really, and the graphic will talk about like how we go from diversion, which is kind of what Will is talking about, right? All the way to outcomes, which is housing. And so our diversion hopefully will help stop our inflow, looking at ways to decrease our inflow and increase our outflow. So what we really want in our system is to have more people going out to housing and less people coming in and into homelessness, and all the different routes in between to assist in that process. Not sure what happened. So, Sasha, can you share it? I don't know where she went. She's still here?
What would you like shared, Taria?
Hi, Taria. Do you want it on the screen or do you want to share it in the chat?
If you put it on the screen, that's great. And then we can see it in here, because in the chat we can't. Then I'd have to go and touch things you don't want me to touch. I think you could have us, I should not be doing it. Oh, thank you for sending that.
All right, and then this was for the exit strategy. So it you might have to explain some of the items listed on here, but I'll share it now.
So this, of course, addresses more single adults. Obviously, if you're dealing with families, then this looks a little different, but it shouldn't look that much different because your homeless prevention is gonna be, of course, that 211. Right now, emergency rental assistance, even though we know those spots are small. Oh, the other one, sorry, there we go. BHAP would go in there, and so BHAP funding, can't remember the acronym, basic.
Housing assistance.
Housing assistance program. Hey, I was told I had the first word. Basic housing assistance program. They actually have many agencies that have funding to help people that if they have an eviction notice, that they can, if there is funding available, receive the payment directly to the landlord so they can stay housed. Go ahead. Actually, can Mercy talk about BHAP funding?
Yes.
Mercy, thank you. Mercy, don't beat it to me. Go ahead, have that.
So BHAP is limited funding that the program participants, if they are eligible, excuse me. If they are eligible, they can. So the deal is, if they can show and provide proof of income that they can continue paying their rent, we can provide assistance for the, what we've been doing is paying for a month or two, the ballpark around $2,500 of financial assistance. If they can provide the notice to quit, the landlord's W-9, the signed copy of their lease agreement, a ledger preferably showing what they owe currently, because evictions do go fast, and then their ID and yeah, if they haven't used it within that year. So for us, it's from July to June. If they have not used BHAP that year from 2022 to now, they are eligible to utilize it following the requirements I just listed. Some of the partners that have been active are Shiloh Community Housing. Ms. Vivica Carr is our point of contact. She'll send us the information that we need, but the things that hold her up are the listed documentation requirements that need to be submitted together, not separately to her, so that it comes to us. It's fast processing if we receive everything together within that time frame. And then also there's Partners for Progress, Covenant House, Consumer Web, the mental health, and am I leaving anybody else out? I can get you a list and post that on of those folks that still have a little bit of funding left. We've seen the highest burn rate for this grant in this fiscal year since July 22. As of October last year, we burned through 120 grand. A majority of that direct assistance was to try and assist folks that had arrears. And so just putting that out there, I did pump the brakes on this because if I didn't, we'd be out by now. So just trying to figure out who in your list is eligible, who has landlords that are willing to work with them to keep them housed, because what we don't want is you submit all of that information to us and then they still end up being homeless. Then that defeats the purpose of utilizing these funds. And so thank you for the opportunity, Ms. Taria. I'll turn it back to you.
And so, one of the conversations is that we're seeing, at least with family emergency cold weather shelters, it seems that there's not a lot of folks that know about, these prevention fundings that are out there. And it seems like a lot of people do, since you went through 120,000, but more unaware, because we are seeing a lot of new families come into homelessness. And it was, oh, we owed this money, we didn't know where to go. And they would leave their apartments, which, instead of having the eviction on their record. But there are other ways to help and making sure we get the word out of 211 and then being able to give them the resources that they need in that time frame. So as we move along the continuum, you see about the resources and referrals, talking about coordinated entry, outreach. I know Meg talked about the robust outreach that is going on now with teams going out and doing pop-ups 3 days a week. Navigation centers and shelters. I think everybody got the blast from CSS about their new navigation center, R3. I think it's R3. Yes, thank you. That is opening. Oh, hello, CSS. That is opening. And low barrier shelters that can be accessed. So as you can see, when we're really talking about a system, it is all of these things working together towards getting to where we all want to be, which is that outflow. And I really, really love this graphic. Like I said, it's made for single adults, but I think that you could modify it for any of our populations by just a little bit. And I know yesterday we talked about, that intersection with Department of Corrections. This one might look a little different when it comes to the housing or homeless response section in the blue for that specific population. But if you haven't seen this, it's great. Sasha, I believe, will be putting it in the chat. So thanks, Sasha, for doing that and welcoming conversations about our HPRS here. It's different in other places.
Can I add one more thing? For those grants like BHAP, when you submit things to us, we're taking it to provide the financial assistance process as it meets eligibility requirements. But we're trusting that you're doing your due diligence for data and entering that info into HMIS on your end, and entering them and exiting them. Thank you.
Actually, I want to ask a question about that because you take referrals from folks who wouldn't otherwise be HMIS users too. So we're not capturing some of them. We have a little bit of a donut.
So whoever submits to us, we have an online check request form that asks, have you entered this in HMIS?
You ask, can they enter it into HMIS if they're an HMIS user or not?
Some of our partners are already in HMIS. And so we're asking them that question. And if not, then I have our assistant give them a call to follow up.
Okay. So if we find that we have a donut hole for that, because we're finding ones that aren't in HMIS, make sure we're connecting back so we can help do that.
Yep. And then Susan Lukowski is our data director, so she makes sure that we're in compliance for these things. So we do have something in the works. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So then that made me have an HMIS question. So are they entered into the project of the referring agency as a service provided, or does everyone have access to the project that is that BHAP assistance? Like, how is it entered into HMIS? I guess would be the question. I'm not a referring agency, so I don't know.
It should come from the referring agency because, those things are locked. It's not like I can go in and enroll them for you, which is why I asked that.
So it'd be a service delivery or a service transaction under the project that they're enrolled in with your agency.
That's what I would imagine.
So there wouldn't really be a way to run a report of who received that service because it would be under each individual agency.
Yeah. So we can't capture all BHAP recipients in a single report out of HMIS. I am sure you have that information.
That was a nightmare for Carlo when he was on, he had a spreadsheet. And trying to keep up with all of the incoming data for one person is a nightmare. And so instead of putting all the work on one person, it's the partnership that we all have here is like, if you have somebody that is already coming into your program, I don't know what it looks like on your end. On my end, I know when they come in, our data team enters them as is into HMIS. If they are BHAP homeless prevention folks, they are listed as that. Do I know how HMIS spits out the report for all partners? That's a Susan question. I can find out and let you know.
Actually, what we'll do, Celia and Susan can start the touch base and then we can go from there. And the reason we're very interested in this is I think there'll be considerable advocacy in the legislature this year to get BHAP to keep pace with inflation. It has been flat funded for a real long time. And since we're talking about inflation proofing some funding, we want to make sure BHAP and special needs grant funding are part of that conversation. So running down a little bit of the data rabbit hole there with a purpose. And I see Sid's hands up.
Get the floor? Thank you. Wow. So I have to say, these last 2 days have been amazing. It's wonderful to see so many of you. But I really want to emphasize how important this coordinated entry and homeless management information system is, and how critical it is that you help tailor it to meet everyone's needs. I'm the chair of the compliance committee for the advisory council, which is designated by HUD as the continuum of care for Anchorage. If you want to fund a program with HUD money, it will come through my committee. And those of you who can show us how you rank people and how you serve people get a lot better score when it's time to parcel out the money from HUD. So take coordinated entry really, really seriously, and take the homeless management information system really, really seriously. And oh, by the way, HUD is really anxious to have our committee that reviews and ranks the HUD applications have a lot broader representation from the community. And I'm seeing people in this room that I have never seen at a rank and review committee meeting in the past. So come on board and help us do a great job of reviewing and ranking the applications next time HUD asks for us to help them spend some money. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Sid, for that plug for your committee, and I see Jessica's hand.
I just want to echo what Sid just said and just underscore that the HMIS data is our community's data, and it can affect how we are eligible for money coming into our community. So it's not just about the data quality of your particular program and how that might affect what happens within your grants or your relationships. It's how that feeds into the entire community's data and can affect our scoring for these millions and millions of dollars that come into our COC.
It's also how we, and I see Celia's hand too, as that's her field or her area. It's how we present to others our needs. Like you talked earlier with Will about metrics that you want to see from Will's program and why we want to see those. And everybody was really excited. And what I thought was everybody in this room wants to make data-informed decisions. That was exactly my thought. And if we can get everyone to be doing that, it's the way we go and talk to our friends over at Rasmussen about why we need things and how we can get extra grants and have public and private partnerships, because they ask us, what's the need? How do you show us where the need is? Show us how you got there. And we want to be able to pull that together. So all of this is extremely important. And I'll let Celia say something. I'll say my last comment about not data.
If you're a provider who's interested in HMIS data from a macro level and you haven't had a conversation with me about the macro view of HMIS in the community, I'll run to my desk and put my email in the chat, or maybe I can phone a friend and ask either Robert or Sasha to put my email in the chat. Thank you. I'm happy to have a conversation with you about like what we use that for from a community perspective. If you're a provider who's not a current HMIS user and you're interested in exploring what that would look like for your organization, you can contact me and I'll start the initial conversation. And then I'll probably at some point pass you off to our system administrator to have further conversations about the technical aspects of that. If you're interested in the philosophy of why to do HMIS, I am super happy to have those conversations about why I think it's important, why it makes us to have data-informed decisions. I think I say this at every meeting. We talk a lot about data quality in my world. We talk a lot about the struggles of data. I have conversations with BFF about the struggles of getting data in there, and Anchorage punches well above its weight as far as like being able to do meaningful work with the data. And I think that's a really important moment to uplift, especially in this space.
How much does, and I already know the answer, but I'm going to pitch it to the AC chair. How much does HMIS cost providers? Not how much it costs
providers?
Zero. It is literally, it costs you nothing. It does cost time and energy, and we know that it takes time and energy to do the data entry, but it costs you nothing because we know, and HUD has made it a point that we must capture data in HMIS. So with that, I want to just circle back to the BHAP. We will be convening the BHAP group, and we meaning ACDH, and inviting that conversation, and Celia and probably Susan to come to better understand and better elevate that system and how we can make sure everyone can access it and knows what's happening. So we already had Mercy join on yesterday, and Will said he's going to join, even if to listen in, to really help to move the needle on the diversion of stopping the inflow into our system so we can focus on the ones we have in our system and move them out. So those things are coming, and it is a major focus. I guess part of a new job title change, maybe. I don't know.
All right, well, I think we're just kind of waiting for, so we can, lunch is here, so I can set it up. So why don't we take 10, and we won't, if you want to take a break there online, we won't start without you, we promise. Let's just make it even noon. We will start again at noon. We will wrap in this conversation with code enforcement along with our working lunch topic anyway. We'll just go from there. All right, I'm gonna mute the room just so you don't have to listen to all of our chatter and shuffling. Thanks.
All right, folks, we're gonna get started here in just about a minute or two. We have couple people still grabbing something to eat. And really the next piece here is to just talk. I think we've kind of started the conversation, but you know, this is that particular issues, particular challenges and particular solutions, really trying to think it through, like, what do you see? What circumstances are not being successful in housing? What clients are you just unable to locate housing for because there's something? Because we never get an opportunity in the space to have that really particular conversation. And then if we're visited by our guests from code enforcement, we will make space for that. So I'll let anyone kick it off.
I'll kick off the first one, which is sex offenders. It is nearly impossible to house those that are on the sex offender registry or have a sex offense. They cannot go into any AHFC property. They cannot go into any property that, and somebody can tell me if I'm saying it wrong, that receives HUD funding. Like there is no, and then a lot of private landlords are saying just no. So housing that population has been increasingly hard.
I know for the voucher programs, as long as they're not on the lifetime registry, they're good. They can still obtain vouchers. But it's definitely harder to find landlords to accept them. And sometimes you have to make some concessions with the landlords to accept them.
Is there a duty to disclose the status of someone, or is it just that they will look up people in their due diligence as landlords? I don't know the answer.
They'll pull backgrounds.
Pull background.
Most of them, yeah.
Or pull background checks, or what they can find online.
It depends on the landlord and what system they're choosing to use.
Okay.
Are these among the groups that LHP is working with landlords on?
That is, yes, that is a tier 2, as far as landlord.
So Nancy go ahead. Nancy, I don't know, can you just remind people about the tier 2 aspect?
Yeah, so the incentives we've used are 1,000 for sort of more typical rental, and then 1,500 if a person has barriers, and sex offenders would certainly be included in that. I think the challenge that we have is looking at rent assistance once you have that person housed. If they're disqualified for federal rent assistance programs, there needs to be some community funds that are dedicated to that population. I might just jump in and say pets. Pets are another one that are challenging, but really important. And I don't know, we've been sort of toying with some ideas around pet incentives. I don't know. Anything to help landlords welcome a pet.
I was just gonna add, as we talk about challenges, you've been really successful in that area and you've had a strategy there as.
The other thing with pets is sometimes it also caps the client's budget. So we'll have landlords that will allow pets, but then they do like the pet deposit. That is like maybe half of the security deposit. So it could be upwards for $800 additional that they need. And then a monthly pet rental fee on top of that. And most pet deposits are not returned, or it says in the lease that it's not returned to them when they leave. So it's not something that will come back. So it is, it's another thing if you get the pet.
The pet rent is also not covered under almost any voucher or funding source. So then the client, if they can't pay anything, can't pay for their pet. I'll say it because I know that our shelter is not a kill shelter, and you can surrender your pet for 30 days. If you're looking for like a home, you want the person to not be outside. We've had small success with some youth surrendering their pet so that they could move in and then found a friend within 30 days. But I will say it's the hardest conversation. It's up on that list of hard conversations you have to have. So I'm a owner and yeah, I would struggle. So
Both of our shallow subsidy programs, from the ARPA funding for single adults and Bezos for families, if that was the final barrier to getting someone in, is being able to pay that pet rent or pet deposit, you should reach out to us, because that would be a way that we can use that flexible funding to break that barrier to housing. And that is truly it. We can be that catalyst to finish it off.
I think determining if it's a support animal as well is really important under fair housing laws and stuff like that. So you can make that determination and kind of move that issue in that positive light with the landlord. You can see a lot of successes as well. And so especially with individuals who are in a program that has an eligibility requirement for a disability, you know, having an assessment of the disability and then getting them to their primary care provider and getting all of that taken care of seems to move that issue along as well.
Does anyone know if the Ready to Rent program includes a pet section? And if not, that would be a really cool thing to make sure we're providing to our prospective tenants, but then also that they can convey to a landlord that they've done a training around that.
I don't think it's in there. I know that Covenant House, we've added it to ours because the PowerPoint you can edit. It might be covered under the, like, how to be a good neighbor, but I don't know if it's actually in the formal presentation. But the best thing about that is you can alter and add a lot to it. So we've kind of done that. In the one that we present, that because it's a big problem with our youth. Everybody looks at that.
We have some service providers here who run housing programs. What are the kind of specific issues that lead to termination or, no, I'm sorry, we can't rent to you in our types of programs beyond just basic eligibility? Like where are those red flags, or where are those lines where you have to start having a conversation? You could say hygiene is a big thing.
Carrie in the chat mentions that training is a practice. Being untrained and listening to support animal means training indoors along with training as well.
Oh,
You're not the host anymore.
all right, keep going. We'll take care of that.
Okay.
Keep going.
So that's a big one, is, you know, being able to keep their unit safe and sanitary, causing damage to their unit, because most don't. You have to almost cut your losses at that point and say, we can't afford to have the continued damages happen. Criminal behavior. So someone starts, you know, dealing drugs out of their unit, or essentially repeated lease violations.
Couple checks, just make sure that we're staying consistent. But yeah.
But yeah, I can say that from Rural Cap standpoint, we really try hard on that mediation. There's not a whole lot that is this is an immediate termination right now. It tends to be behavior that escalates, behavior that is continued without, you know, any kind of attempt at resolution. Yeah, Like those are probably the big ones. And then of course, unpaid rent.
I was gonna say from, working with a couple programs, I know, like, the one that, there's a bunch of them, I've got a list of like 5 of them here, but, community is the biggest one. It's one of the implicit, problems with the scattered site models. That, you know, I've got a guy in mind who, was home for good, who did really well. His apartment was clean. You know, followed most of the rules, but he'd been living on the street for 12 years. And, you know, he owed people had saved his life literally. And
Next to move towards their ultimate goal. I've worked in this for a long, long time, and people who will tell you no or that they want to stay homeless are actually rejecting our system and the options, and not necessarily the goal of having a safe, affordable place where they can lock the door. So that, and some people, you know, a city life isn't what they want. They don't want somebody in for, you know, above and on both sides of them. They need something that's a little bit more space. And so it could be a move. There's lots of things that I think are behind that sentiment. I don't doubt, Laura, that you hear that, because, you know, that is what gets conveyed. But I was just going to say the other thing that I think we've seen is, Sam's going to talk to you today about Home for Good, but being creative around harm reduction and making sure that people, I saw someone put in the chat, smoking, just regular smoking is such a problem in units, and helping people find different ways to smoke or to engage in whatever the problematic behavior is outside of the unit, or just lots of problem solving. Some people might be willing to vape if that's allowed in the unit. So there's a lot of harm reduction sort of skill development and work that can be done with people. And what I've really appreciated about some of our landlord housing partnership case manager meetings is we're able to actually get into some of those conversations about, hey, what's worked for you? And just sharing of information has been pretty magic. I really like those meetings. So if we could do more of that as the coalition for case managers and support around brainstorming, I think that would be super helpful.
Mary, you want to go ahead?
Sure, I'll share about one of the challenges that I kept running into. We have individuals that have significant barriers, you know, mental illness, chronic homeless background, with substance abuse issues as well, and I think that I had several clients that struggled maintaining housing in scattered site permanent supportive housing. And because of their sex offender background, they cannot get into permanent supportive housing with support services on site. And the issue is that I had to do several mutual terminations and rehouse because that was the only option.
Yeah, Mary, I tell you, the sex offender population is one that I'm still trying to figure out where is the solution? And every time I think of one, I feel like there's another roadblock. I don't know where the fix is, but it's a hard aspect. And it's a question that we don't necessarily ask when we're in shelter. It's not captured in HMIS. It was something that we were talking about kind of as a team. This is a serious housing barrier. And if we're moving someone along a housing pipeline, how can we do that without that information? Not all of us look up our clients on CartView. Not all of our clients are telling us the full story of what is happening. And then I've had cases where a landlord has told me about someone's criminal history, and I'm like, oh, I guess I should have known that. But that never came up because you're talking to the client, you're asking them, you're doing the assessments of what are your barriers? And if they're not mentioning the barriers, you don't necessarily know those unless you're doing the research yourself, which takes a lot of time and knowledge to do so. And also, some people could feel it's an invasion of privacy. There are some organizations who do not allow their staff to go on CourtView and look up their clients. Like you cannot look Johnny up, even though it's a part of your job. So it is something that I think we definitely need to work towards. And Nancy's point of having some kind of meeting or support. I thought at one point HSC was doing a monthly like case management meeting throughout all of the MOA. And so if I'm seeing some no's, so if that needs to be something that's brought back together, then that used to be a space long time ago when I did direct service that, you know, we could get together and share and connect and network, because we all direct service workers are usually experiencing and doing the same thing, hopefully, or willing to do it better.
There's a Facebook group that does that.
There's a Facebook group. Is it AHFC led or social workers?
And service providers in the municipality.
I think another barrier that a lot of participants face is homeless verification. A lot of people experience homelessness, but for some of the HUD apartments and houses, they want to verify homelessness. And that's hard for some people to do when they've been homeless for so long and there's no way to get that verification. I believe it's HUD that requires just a few different ways that they can verify. So it's hard for them to produce those things.
Go ahead,
I'm just thinking, I wonder if there's a way to use coordinated entry to help assist with that, because if someone is on the coordinated entry list, they've had a coordinated entry assessment where length of time homelessness and instances of homelessness have been documented.
Sometimes that does help, but sometimes they want a year, 12 months. And with coordinated entry, it's from the time that you start coordinated entry. And for some people that have been homeless for years and only start coordinated entry a month after they actually start getting involved in services, that's when the issue becomes, because they're on a voucher, say for Neighbor Works or something like that. And Neighborhood Work says, okay, we're gonna give you this voucher, but you need to give us 12 months of homeless verification. And that's something that they might not be able to do, but yet they have this opportunity to get a voucher. So what should someone do in that? There's not giving them a fair opportunity to advocate for their situation if they have been experiencing homelessness and there's no way to, obtain those documents.
I see Laura, who probably knows the answer to that.
What we do is we rely on all the information in HMIS to continue to document. Individuals are able to self-certify 3 months worth of homelessness, so without any documentation at all. And then other service providers, or maybe some of their friends or family who have seen them in their living situation over a 12-month period, whether that's 4 or more times or whether that's consecutive, they're able to certify to their homelessness as well. So that has been pretty beneficial to get individuals over the specific hurdles of the documentation piece. And then reaching out to providers in our community who are not on HMIS and double checking to see if there's been any stays in their shelters, or if there's been any outreach that has been done for those individuals.
It just can be difficult sometimes because with the requirements, sometimes they don't allow those verifications to come from friends or family. They have to be organizations or places that person has, like shelters, for instance.
With shelter licensing starting, HMIS will be required. So it's rolling out in 23, but by 24, every shelter will be required to use HMIS.
So then a question, I'm going to look at the not service providers over there.
Oh, yes.
Because so what Rural Cap has is a form that is labeled homeless status third party verification. And it's like you guys I'm sure have all seen it. Like you fill it out basically and you're certifying that this person meets all of these definitions. If that person has a coordinated entry assessment that has determined that they meet those qualifications, is ACH comfortable completing a?
We have.
Absolutely.
I would say, I've gotten them from you guys before, so that was, I was gonna say that, but.
And through CE, and then go through CE, and in that process has identified enough circumstances, then we would do it as well.
Right now, I know that at Awake, we have several participants that are trying to obtain verifications for homelessness. And they get to a point where they have maybe 6 or 7, but they've been homeless for so many years, and this is all that we can come up with is 6 or 7, and yet their opportunity still gets passed by, so.
That's a little trickier because the domestic violence side of things with
Doesn't-
coordinated entry, that means, what?
But,
No, what?
no, I was gonna say it doesn't feed in to
Yeah,
our
it
system.
doesn't feed into the system. However, if you needed the third-party verification to do a coordinated entry assessment and somehow get it back to you as confidential, we could work that out. That doesn't seem insurmountable.
And
Because
it-
we already do coordinated entry, so we can figure that out.
And it's client choice, so your client is choosing to have that participation, so it's not like you guys are giving information to us about the person. There's actually, Mika, does CE assessments like all day long at this point, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. Yeah, you did. So awesome, yeah.
Yeah.
I just did one other little ad. I used to work at the neighborhood health center and I would do it off of like appointments where a provider had typed in that someone was homeless. So that might be one other place that you could get it. Definitely not someone that's putting not HMIS.
I appreciate that.
But it would be an easy.
Yeah, that's helpful information because even with the HMIS, with the domestic violence and confidentiality, there's only so much that we're able to share.
And I see Joseph on the attendee list and I know that.
Good. You're welcome.
And then also the agencies that you are trying to certify chronic homeless status with, reach out to them and see what percentage they're at with their full self-certifications.
Okay.
So agencies are able to take up to 25% of their program capacity as full self-certs, where a client is doing the full 12 months worth of self-certification.
Thank you.
So there's room, you might be able to squeeze that individual in as a whole.
Yeah, anything we can get to get those 12 months, because right now they're stopping a lot of people from moving forward to the next step. And it's just, it's a big barrier and it's a smaller barrier in a bigger process for them. So just to get over that hurdle is very helpful.
I think what we see as the biggest hurdle is the verification of disability.
That also, that's the same situation. It's the worst. It's the disability. It's very difficult, especially when you haven't been to the doctor in years and clearly you are disabled. And, you know, the first time you go to a doctor, it's from that point, from when you do get that primary care and you're working with that doctor, that you've clearly been disabled for years.
Who's asking for those certifications?
We have to have it for our PSH program.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, let's talk more about that. That's very interesting
Oh,
and
it's rough. It's so hard.
it shouldn't be
It
that.
makes me want to find a friend with a clinician and we can do tradesies. Like, how about my clinician does yours and your clinician does mine?
So there's some tips and tricks I used to use when I represented people seeking social security disability who didn't have access to things. So I think that that might be able to be an extension of some kind of case conferencing or community of practice, because we do know a high percentage of individuals experiencing homelessness also have a disability. And so I would be very much interested in engaging that. I don't generally convene like case conferencing type groups, but I would be very interested in doing that because I think it's a huge hurdle. There's already just issues with having a disability and getting into housing, let alone housing with some services attached.
Yeah, it's a big challenge. It's not necessarily finding a provider that will do the verification of disability. You just have to get the appointment and it's appointments are weeks out.
So an individual who's licensed in the state of Alaska to diagnose and treat that individual's disability can sign off on it. So,
Alaska's made it super hard, and
Yeah, so like a chiropractor can't sign off on a mental illness diagnosis or anything like that, but HUD also allows us to utilize SSI or SSDI as documentation for initial entry. And then we have 45 days to then acquire a verification of disability. And the same with medical documentation. If they have medical documentation that maybe they've been carrying around for 20 years that has a DSM diagnosis or anything like that, that can verify that they have this specific disability, we can hold that for 45 days while case managers work to get a verification of disability.
Okay.
What's the source of it? Is it like state regulation, state statute, federal regulation statute?
It's good. It's a COC regulation. Okay. I've already got a few thoughts.
I'm sending it to you right now.
I'm gonna have my own case conferencing group. We're gonna talk about disability barriers.
Meg, I raised my hand to ask if, that you can just see by this conversation, the energy that it brings. People are really struggling with some of these issues, and it seems logical to me that we might put case conferencing networking at the end of coordinated entry. That's where that would be a draw for everyone to attend coordinated entry and kind of give a forum to pass on some of these tips and tricks. Laura's got a bunch of them, like there's so much information available. There's a lot of new people in the field. I think we could just have a really great win-win here.
Hey, you're previewing some changes that are coming to case conferencing we already have in motion, so thank you.
Basically. Go ahead.
I was just gonna share the trick that I did, and it was just a lot of crying at the DMV and vital statistics, but the HMIS ID, I've gotten the DMV and vital statistics to take as a secondary form. So just so y'all know, upload photos, because it helps me a lot, but we've done that with our youth because we don't have anything, and you have to get the birth certificate to get the ID, but you have to have 16 things. You have to have a residency, which, most homeless people don't have, but we struggle because for one of our programs, we have to have a social security card to get paid back from our vendor. And we can't get that without the other two things. So we've been using the HMIS ID, and that's why we have, you guys even were nice enough to upload our logo into it. So it prints out, it's a little card.
Great, we can do more of that.
Yeah.
Also, if you don't know when case conferencing is, like Nancy said, then please, you can put your information in the chat. We'll make sure somebody gets it. It's adults, TAY, which is transition age youth, families, and then veterans, and apparently now a new disability one. But we do those usually on a bi-weekly basis, and each of them have a separate meeting. And it's more impactful the more of you attend. And there is a list, and they talk about CE there because CE is very important. But then, like Nancy says, at the end, it can be structured to learn things and to network and to problem solve. But you can't problem solve without people in the room. So thank goodness Laura is here, or even a representative from your agency. Like when Rural Cap shows up and you're like, I applied 5 weeks ago, they might not be able to give you an answer then, but they can take it back and then, problem solve afterwards. So it is about those connections.
This has been a very fruitful conversation. I think this is, this practical tips and tricks stuff, I think is key. We are all trying stuff, and it's good to share what works and what doesn't work. Or why it didn't work or it didn't work for us. And then someone's like, well, wait, you got to do it this way. And that's how it unlocks it. I think unless there's anything in the comments online, Robert, anything else there? No?
Looks
Okay.
like we're good for a transition.
Okay, I think we're ready for our next presentation. And that this afternoon is all about permanent supportive housing. So I can do it from here, wherever you.
Robert has the presentation.
Robert has it, so. I'm gonna let Jessica from Rural Cap kick us off. And then we're gonna also hear from Nancy talking about Home for Good. Really talk about a couple of different models of permanent supportive housing. So
That's
I will-
Sam. Sorry, Sam Longacre's in the
Sam,
room there.
All right, there he's here. Okay. And great. Sorry, Sam. As soon as we get the right screen up. There we go. Oh, now we're in the matrix. Okay, there we go. All right.
Sorry.
No
Al.
problem.
So I threw together some slides, but I really wanted this to be an interactive conversation as well. We've talked a lot about different types of housing interventions, and we talked a lot yesterday about the differences between permanent supportive housing and transitional housing. And so I intended this to be a high-level conversation about permanent supportive housing. What is it? What does it look like? Especially what does it look like in our community? And what are some of the intended outcomes or benefits to permanent supportive housing? Should I just say ding, like those old fashioned when you would read the books along with the recording? So this is just a definition of permanent supportive housing. So permanent supportive housing, it's an intervention that combines affordable housing assistance with voluntary support services, addressing the needs of people experiencing chronic homelessness. So the purpose of those services is to build those independent living skills, those tenancy skills, and then also to connect people with community-based healthcare, treatment, employment services. So that's kind of the package of permanent supportive housing. Next. So there's three types of permanent supportive housing. There's a scattered site model where program participants are placed in apartment units that are scattered all around a community or scattered within one large building. We have that here in Anchorage. That's the model that NeighborWorks uses. Clustered scattered site, which would be two or more smaller buildings, generally in the same area or on a campus together, where you might have, you know, a community of a bunch of duplexes or something like that. And I'm not aware of any models like that here in Anchorage.
Oh, okay.
And then the single site model, which is Rural Cap's permanent supportive housing, is a single site model. Single site models can have two subcategories: a single use, where all of the units in a building are permanent supportive housing units, or a mixed use, where program participants are in a portion of the units within a complex or a building. And those other apartments are generally non-subsidized housing units. So that would be like a block of units in a larger apartment building. Next. So permanent supportive housing has some key indicators or key functions of it. So choice in housing and living arrangements, functional separation of housing and services. And we talked a little bit about that yesterday, that your housing and your services are separate. They're not dependent on each other. That the housing be decent, safe, and affordable, especially permanent supportive housing that is HUD funded has some very specific requirements around that. Community integration and rights of tenancy. We talked about the importance of leases yesterday. We talked about the Landlord Tenant Act. Permanent supportive housing is permanent housing, so it comes with those rights. And also that community integration, that you are part of the larger community in which you live, whether that is the building that you live in or the actual neighborhood or community that you're living in. And then flexible voluntary services. So those supportive services that are being offered not only are voluntary, but they're flexible based on the needs of the individual person. Not everybody needs that same service that is living in permanent supportive housing. So now I'm gonna, that's small type. But this is a little bit about each of those categories and some more details about that. So client choice, that clients have a choice of living alone or living with family or friends. There's permanent supportive housing options out there that allow multiple people in a unit. That they have choice in the location, the neighborhood type, a choice in the type and size of unit, A choice in the maintenance requirements. Some units have housekeeping services that are part of it. Some units, you're responsible for that yourself. Proximity to specific services and public transportation. Different people are going to have different needs when it comes to that. And the maximum monthly rent and utilities, that there always be that choice and that option out there for the clients. The separation of housing and services, very important. Participation in specific support services, not be required to get the housing, not be required to keep the housing. And that there's various approaches to how you can implement that as a permanent supportive housing provider. So some permanent supportive housing projects have a complete separation where it is different organizations providing the different services. Sometimes it's a functional separation where it's all one organization. This would be like Rural Cap does. So we're all one organization providing that, but we have distinct separation between the property management staff and the case management staff. And then there's operational implementation where the service providers are based off of off-site. So it's completely separate. They're not even there. It's a completely different building. Decent, safe, affordable housing. So HUD follows a standard of quality, which is its housing quality standards. All units have to meet that standard and pass an inspection in order to be considered for HUD funding for permanent supportive housing. Tenants pay a reasonable amount of their income towards rent and utilities. When it comes to HUD-funded PSH, there are very specific requirements on how much of a tenant's income can be put towards rent and utilities. And underneath there, you can see those guidelines are 30% of their adjusted income for their housing expenses. Community integration and rights. So permanent supportive housing is the most successful when it's in regular residential areas. Integrating into a community and into a neighborhood is really important for someone who is in permanent supportive housing and working towards healing and working towards having a successful tenancy. Tenants participating in community activities, they receive community services from the community in which they're living. They have full legal rights in a landlord-tenant arrangement, so that we talked about yesterday, those protections under that lease, really important in permanent supportive housing, and also really important that they understand that they have those rights and they understand what they are. It doesn't mean, though, that tenants don't have to abide by normal standards of behavior and conduct that's outlined in a lease. Important that it goes both ways, that tenants understand the protections they have, but also the responsibilities that are under a lease. And those are distinct from program rules. There might be a separate set of rules related to the program participation that are outside of that lease. That lease is that legal document that outlines those obligations between the tenant and the landlord. And then flexible voluntary services. So understanding that people can accept or refuse treatment or other services, but you continue to offer that support to them regardless of that. And using those flexible engagement strategies, recognizing that you're going to have to meet people where they are. And you'll continue to offer that because you don't know someone who did not want to engage in those services today, tomorrow might be a whole different story. The type, the location, the intensity, the frequency of those services, that you adjust those to meet those ongoing needs. Someone who is engaging right now might not be able to engage at that same level in the future. So understanding that there's going to need to be that flexibility. And then making sure that part of those support plans include risk management and crisis planning, because there's going to be those types of escalations. And so you need to be able to have that be part of your service delivery plan.
There's a little feedback somewhere. A bit. Or if Elizabeth, can you mute?
Oh, yeah, I got it. Who is it again?
Elizabeth?
There we go. Thank you.
And anyone feel free to stop if you have questions in the middle of this. We do not have to just go through this slide by slide, but we also can. So next, Robert. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was wondering how important it was having people's lived experience inform this process.
Very important. So one of the things that RoCap does is has regular tenant meetings where each individual, because we have a single site model, so each property will hold regular tenant meetings where we have conversations about program rules, about suggestions that tenants might have, upcoming activities that are going on. That communication back and forth is really important. A big part of someone's success in permanent supportive housing is trust. And if you have not been able to build that trust and build that relationship, it's going to be really challenging going forward. So very important. One of the things Rural Cap has had in the past and then recently has resurrected post-COVID was a tenant advisory board. Where we actually have a group of tenants from our permanent supportive housing as well as our rental housing that meet regularly with a group of stakeholders and have conversations about policy decisions going forward.
How long are generally people who have been there before they join that advisory board? Is a period of time where
This is going to be historical because, like I said, it was a little bit on pause for a while there when things were locked down, but it really depended on the person. I know we had people who would join right away because that was part of that initial conversation was that this opportunity existed. And then we would have people who would be on the advisory board for a while and then for whatever reason didn't want to engage at that level anymore and would switch out. It is very dependent on the tenant, but I think personally the tenant meetings are the place where really that work happens. If you think about it in terms of like city government, like going all the way down to the community council level and the work and the conversation that happens at that level versus what happens at an assembly meeting. It's kind of that hierarchy there. So I think the engagement all the way down at the site level is really important. All right, you can go back to the next slide now. Oh, the one right before this. So this is just some data that I pulled that I wanted to share. When Carluck Manor first opened and the Housing First project up in Fairbanks, operated by TCC, the University of Alaska Institute for Circumpolar Health Studies, it's a mouthful, instituted a research study where they took data from project participants prior to entering permanent supportive housing and then followed them through their first 3 years of tenancy and tracked a lot of different data points. And I put a link on this slide that is very, very long, but we can share it out to the whole study. But I think that these two data points really speak to some of the successes in permanent supportive housing. And when I talk about the reduction in emergency services use, that would be calls to APD or AFD, stays in an emergency shelter, and accessing the sleep-off center. So after their first 2 years being housed, we saw a reduction in those services by 58%. And I don't know if you all know this, but those are really expensive interventions. And so the reduction, and this is all in that study where they actually took dollar amounts and put dollar amounts to this, but the savings that were recognized by the reduction in use of those emergency services was huge. And then after 3 years housed, you can see that it continued to go down. So the longer someone is housed, the more stability they're recognizing and reducing their use of those emergency services. And I like to highlight this one, the next one, because I'm going to highlight one of the or it's not really a consequence, I guess. One of the benefits of longer term stays in permanent supportive housing is that you'll see this reduction, this initial reduction in emergency room and healthcare costs, because a lot of times people are accessing the emergency room because that's all they have. They don't have a primary care physician. They don't have a relationship with a healthcare provider. So when they have a health crisis, they go to the emergency room, which is the most expensive intervention that there is. But then you'll see that after 3 years housed, that reduction actually turned into a slight increase. But what that is someone who is achieving that stability, now accessing regular healthcare services that they may not have been in the past. And specifically for Carluck Manor, I can speak of, we had someone who had some pretty severe underlying health conditions that had never been treated or diagnosed. And so within the first 2 years, they were able to form that relationship with a primary healthcare provider, have some of those diagnoses made, and start receiving treatment, which ended up being an expensive treatment and kind of skewed the numbers a little bit there. But I like to highlight that because I think it's something that is actually a benefit. It was kind of exciting to see that this person had some higher healthcare costs because it meant they were actually getting healthcare. All right, next slide. And there's a ton of studies out there. I like to highlight this one, even though it's some old data, because it's actually here. That is actual Alaska information. Those are actual people who lived in our properties, some of whom still live in our properties and are still achieving those successes.
Numbers are, knowing the numbers from the same period, they're very similar, but actually Alaska's a better reduction of public services from Seattle or Tennessee.
Yeah. So this is just a quote. It's a quote that I really like. And I think that one of the things I really like about it is what we do is so impactful and it truly saves lives. And then the last slide is just a list of some resources that I like to share out with people. The coalition's website has links to some data and studies that has some really great information in it. The National Alliance to End Homelessness has tons of resources, both reports and data if you're looking for it, training resources, great things. The U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness, I might be talking about that report. No, not here.
We had, Margaret mentioned it a little bit yesterday in her opening remarks, and we'll add it into the after action resources.
There's an annual report that is produced by that agency or by that council. And then, of course, the HUD website. The HUD website has great information if you're looking for definitions about different types of programs, if you're looking for information about how you might expand into some of those areas, or if you're looking to place someone into a certain type of HUD program, what those eligibility requirements are, and then just some great training and some great resources out there too. I flew through that pretty fast. But would love to answer any questions anyone has or talk more about what we see here in Anchorage around permanent supportive housing and why yesterday we all identified that that was, you know, one of the greatest needs here in Anchorage is more of it. I think that from a fiscal standpoint, even if you don't care about any of the other program outcomes of permanent supportive housing, it saves money. It saves the municipality money. So if you care nothing about anything else around permanent supportive housing, it's cheaper.
Sam, come up and talk a little bit about another model of PSH, Home for Good. And then we can, I'm sure, the two types of PSH side by side might spur some questions. And then I definitely want to follow up on yesterday's conversation before we end today about unit types, because I heard that got to be very good conversation. Do we need independent housing? Do we need rapid rehousing? Do we need permanent supportive housing? So I've got some info to share. Please, Sam.
I think Robert is going to help me out. Robert, do you have another presentation to share?
I'm Sam. I'm the project director for Home for Good at United Way. And Robert's gonna help, so you have something to look at.
Robert?
I did.
Hello, looks like I was sent to only 2 presentations. I don't see one from Sam. Oh, no, that's a lie. Here we go. That is a lie. Change about it. This is the one. My apologies.
It just wasn't sent for me, Robert. I'm just saying you were looking for me.
Chocolate break.
Okay.
I can't help it. All right, we're leaving chocolate in the room.
Sorry. Yeah, this is very important.
How's that one, Robert? Oh, there you go.
Thank you.
Okay, 1 second. Let's get. Okay.
All right. So Home for Good is a project that has lots of partners. The main partners are the municipalities, United Way, where I sit. The coalition has been helping a lot. And then a group called Social Finance, which is a national nonprofit that helps with the model that Home for Good uses for financing. Next slide, please. I don't know like which TV to look at. No, I did a little back and forth. There's 3 of them. So we've had a lot of conversations about how permanent supportive housing is a big need. And one way we've measured this or was measured when Home for Good started. So this number is a little bit old. And I'm sure we could come up with another updated number that's probably higher. But there's this overlap rate of people that are experiencing, we're using the word persistent homelessness here because we didn't match the HUD definition of chronic, but an overlap of long history of homelessness, high use of emergency services, and a history of recidivism. So we know that in that overlap, we have, to what Jessica was talking about, really expensive high emergency use costs. And just this idea that we could use community resources, those are all community resources that they're using, in a different way to help someone get housing and stay housed. Next slide, please. So Home for Good targets that population that is often very visible and very vulnerable in Anchorage. And we have lots of people that we work with in Anchorage, so it's really great because I've met some of you in small ways and get to keep meeting more people where we can see how we can help each other out. So Home for Good's a little bit different in that it's a pay for success model. And I'll talk about that a little bit more with the pretty picture. It was started out as a 3-year project. We've extended it to 5 years so that we can reach the goal of having 150 people housed. And the last month of supportive services will be in September of 2025. Next slide, please. There's a list of partners. So I already talked about the first column. In Pay for Success, the idea is that your project gets paid on outcomes achieved, but obviously you can't start getting outcomes unless you start services. So we had a lot of philanthropic funding and a HUD and Department of Justice grant to get that project planning to do kind of all of the setup, and the contracts are complicated. And then to pay service providers to get the ball rolling so that we can actually have outcomes to get paid on. And the municipality is the one paying those outcome payments. For service providers, we're working with South Central Foundation, Choices, and Alaska Behavioral Health. I'll just take a minute to say that the way someone is eligible for Home for Good is that we have like thresholds in different emergency service use categories. And so it's actually municipal data that's put together to figure out who is using those services at those high rates and are also experiencing kind of long-term homelessness. And then we make referrals from that list. So the answer to the question that I think would happen at the end is, how do I figure out if someone's eligible for Home for Good? And the easiest answer I have for that right now is if you send me their HMIS number, I'll figure out if they're eligible, and then we could make a referral to those service providers. Next slide, please. So this is just showing how Pay for Success financing works. This is the first Pay for Success project in Alaska. So it's kind of a cool model that we get to test and figure out what are the gaps. How do we kind of tweak how we do these service financing models? So we have philanthropy paying up front to get us started. And then United Way is sitting in the middle as kind of the project manager, but also holding those funds. And so we have contracts with those service providers to make the payments. And so the service providers do all of the very hard work of housing folks and putting all of that data in HMIS for us. And then the third-party evaluator uses data in HMIS. So we actually have like lease data in there as well to figure out how many stable months of housing we've achieved in a certain time frame. And then the municipality pays us based on that. So it's just trying to kind of flip this idea a little bit of instead of just getting paid for services, which clearly we needed to do upfront, but can we switch it to getting paid for the outcomes that we've achieved? And so then we use that money to keep that circle going, keep the project running. Any questions on that part?
I'll admit that part's really confusing.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been on both sides of that part and it can get really confusing. It's cool, but it feels hard to track sometimes.
Jessica.
So I think, and maybe this is further on in the presentation, I was just wondering, like, which is stably housed the only outcome that is a payment measure? And is there like a set amount that it's per month stably housed? It's this dollar amount?
It is $3,000 per month of stable housing. So part of that did the person have a lease? So is the person housed? Were they there all month? And if they exceed a certain level of emergency service use criteria, it doesn't count as stably housed anymore. If they have an absence that's long enough, it doesn't count. And so we get paid, and I'm sure this would vary by Pay for Success projects like across the country, but we get paid for that very first month. And then to get any more payments, they have to be housed for 6 months. So that 6-month one is the one that tends to be challenging. First month is one part, and then for the next part, they have to achieve 6 months of stable housing.
If you look in the alcohol tax, you'll see there's a home for good line, which is the municipal commitment. That's what's budgeted, and then depending on the outcomes, what's paid, and then you can kind of see how it shifts over the year.
Have we ever had, and I know it's fairly new, have we ever had a circumstance where the amount budgeted wasn't enough to cover the outcomes? If we were too awesome?
No, we launched right in COVID.
Okay. There was a lot of alcohol being sold.
The commitment for the outcome payments right now is it's a time limited commitment. It's not a forever commitment right now.
Correct. So we extended to 2025. So it's a 5-year project and there's a cap on it. So in total, we can draw down $4.5 million, but we have to achieve the outcomes to get that money. Go ahead.
I'm curious what the outcome measurements are and then how valuable learning is in this process. Because if we don't know all the answers, we have to try and test things out. And I think that's part of that. But like, how are they measuring outcome? Are they rewarding learning? Because that's really important to do on an individual entrepreneur's side of things. You have to celebrate your mistakes. You can't just go and just eat that and then beat up on yourself on it. Because it's just a really important problem we're trying to solve. So I've had that question about how are they measuring and valuing the outcome? So we're curious.
Yeah, I think so the outcome is coming from data of, I was housed on February 1st and I stayed housed by it actually might be 30 days. So February was a terrible month to pick, but for 30 days. So we're getting paid on that. But I would say that the thing that is really cool about that is that we have so much flexibility in this project to try new things. So we can see from data, hey, we're having a really hard time, like we got people in, but we're having a hard time keeping them for that 6-month payment. What can we try and what can we think about and get creative about to see if we can change that for the next one. So I think within this project, I almost want to say because we get paid on outcomes, we have so much flexibility in what we do to get to that outcome.
What I'm trying to figure out how to phrase the question, but what future proofing have you and Nancy done? Because like this was really similar to the Built for Zero in Salt Lake City. And that kind of went belly up when the Home for Good, the funding went away. And like, I know you guys are working on it, but I was just hoping maybe you could talk about
future proofing, like in the project.
yeah, and the 2025.
Yeah.
What do you guys like? What is being put into place for 2026 so that even though the funding might not be there, what are you guys doing to ensure success past that?
Sure. So I think 2 things. One, for people that are in the project, so Home for Good can pay for rent, and then we hope someone would get on a voucher quickly. It's taking a lot longer for people to get on vouchers than what was assumed in original project planning. So part of that is, when do we stop enrolling people so that they have time to get a voucher before the project ends? So a lot of planning that way, I think, and just the timing of bringing new people on. For services, they've kind of transitioned into services that are fully reimbursable by Medicaid. It's really a lot of times that upfront stuff that Home for Good is paying a little extra to make happen. And then I think the other side of that is working with all of you and the municipality to figure out what worked well and what do we want to have after September 2025. What is it a different kind of evaluation? That evaluation is really detailed, so maybe it's a more simplified one, so we could save some money there. Or I think it's then a conversation of what did we learn, how can we take something like that or modify it, or whatever that community want is to do another thing. Nancy and I sometimes call it Home for Good 2.0. So what does Home for Good 2.0 look like? So you can see Bob's hand behind you.
You said something that was really interesting there, that services has transitioned into ones that are Medicaid reimbursable. So did United Way negotiate an 1115 waiver, or did the providers, or was it already in place in order to fund it that way, or how was that done?
So we found that the 1115 waiver as is will, I'm gonna flip it. The thing that's missing from what you can already bill in Medicaid is what happens before the person has a treatment plan. So that's what we've heard from service providers. I give them an HMIS number. They have to go find the person. They have to, build a relationship with the person to get them into an appointment to get a treatment plan. And none of that is billable because they don't have a treatment plan yet. So it's that part. And then we also can help pay for some things that keep people housed that aren't currently community resources, like cleaning services. If that's the thing that's going to help them stay housed, we can kind of do some of those small things.
And are they qualified before they come into, before the voucher comes out, or how long into the process does it take before they're qualified?
I am not sure if they're usually coming in Medicaid eligible or if they're having to apply. But I know that when you apply for Medicaid and you get a start date, so let's say I applied today and it took public assistance a month to process my application, which maybe would be fast. My eligibility technically starts January 1st, and you can bill 3 months backwards. So for Medicaid, that should help.
Thank you so much.
Next slide. So in HMIS, we have different, and I'd say I can't put anything in HMIS, so I'm not gonna be able to answer super detailed questions there. But we can track who's in outreach, who has already agreed to supportive services, who's housed, who's in kind of a temporary location, and then that lovely number of, we have 67 people that are in a lease. And then the voucher part would be that column that says subsidies. So 25% of those 67 folks have housing vouchers. And that's just always going to be our biggest limitation, is the amount of time it takes for somebody to have a voucher. That's
Those housing vouchers include, I believe you have some folks who have emergency housing vouchers, the new vouchers under Treasury, in addition to more traditional vouchers.
Yes.
Okay.
I think we have 3 or 4 that are actually being used yet.
You have, I think you have 5. Okay. Yeah, have each.
Yeah. All right, next slide, please. This is the map I made, so I'm sorry if it's not pretty, of where people live. So when Jessica was talking about scattered site and single site, we have a mix. So Home for Good started as a scattered site model, but we've also started calling it like blocks of rooms. We have 27 people in the guest house, 29, sorry, in the guest house, 15 in different rural properties. So that's kind of I feel like we have a blend. And what we've heard is that, or what we've talked about a lot already, is client choice. We've had some folks that don't want to be where they've had substance use issues before. They want to be in an entirely different neighborhood. We have other folks that don't want to be in an apartment feeling like they're by themselves. So I think the more we can just expand that choice of both neighborhood and kind of building makeup, the better, just to provide all those choices. Next slide, please. This is my favorite one. Well, the bar graphs are my favorite one. So we measure housing stability. We talked about that for payments. So that pie chart is showing out of the total possible months that we could have gotten paid for, per person. In our last evaluation, we achieved 47% of the possible. We would like that number to be closer to 80%. So this is where, to Terry's point, we can get creative about what are we doing differently. So at the guest house, Home for Good pays for a few extra staff to be available for the Home for Good clients that are there. And so a little bit of that is, do we bring more services on site? How can we think about different ways to improve that housing stability metric? And then the bar graphs are emergency service use. So the gray part is 12 months before the person was housed, and then the colored one is 12 months after. I'm trying to remember, I think this is for about 60 people in this one. But you can see, much to Jessica's earlier one, we have a huge reduction in emergency service use when people have a safe place to be. Next slide. This is Alice, and she just can kind of echo that emergency service use part, and that having a safe place to be. And for her, when she talked about her experience, it was really that idea of housing first. Perfectly, her story was a perfect example of it. I needed somewhere safe to be before I could think about anything else. And I think there's just contacts on the next one. Oh, hold on. That probably should have been in there earlier. I feel like we talked about it. I'm going to take questions, and if you go next slide, Robert, you can definitely send me HMIS numbers, and I'll see if they're eligible. And I think any other agencies you can think of. The Public Defender's Office reached out to me, and now, like, with client permission, we'll ask if folks are eligible. And of like 5 people they've asked about, we're eligible for Home for Good.
Number of
what's your total capacity for Home for Good? Like, if you could get all the referrals you needed to be full tomorrow, what's your cap? What's your top number? Is it 150? Like,
150 is the goal.
the goal? Okay.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a loose cap because I think that's maybe what some of the subsidy budget is based on.
Yeah, we'd be paying for rent for anyone that's not on a voucher. So there's a bit of a projection game there of how long is it gonna take someone to connect to a voucher or another source of rental.
Okay, got it. And you're how many out of 150 right now?
67.
67. All right, there's room, folks. Opportunity.
We got a question from Jamelia, who also has their hand up. Jamelia, go for it.
And Robert, you have some background noise from another participant. I did see you. So if you're not on mute, if you can mute yourselves.
No, that was not me. I was just trying to say that Jamelia has a question and would like to, yeah, go for it, Jamelia. I'll try to find the person whose background noise is on.
It's good. She fixed it. Thanks.
There you go, Jamelia. You've been given mic access now.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was unmuted. I was just gonna say, we can cancel my question. I think it got answered. Thank you.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Nancy, did I miss anything?
You didn't. I just wanted to refine your response for Bob. The Home for Good program is really a broker of these services, and I call Sam the in the middle problem solver. And so we don't have 1115 behavioral health services or any direct service resources. We contract with those organizations that do. And I just made a note to ask Sam, I don't know if you know off the top of your head, how many of our service partners are using the 1115 demonstration waiver? I know one is for sure.
I think they all bill under 1115 because ICM's under 1115, right? So all
Yep.
three.
Nope, you're right. You're right. Yes. So that's a state behavioral health Medicaid service that is a demonstration still, but has, we believe, made these services more effective. I think our housing stability rate is a reflection of not only what happened during COVID for participants, you know, we had to move to phone only services and whatnot, but agencies for the full year, I would say maybe even continuing, had a lot of vacancies in programs. And so there's just been a lot of instability in our structures. And we do expect that retention rate, the housing stability rate, to go up over time.
I follow up on that. Do you have any clients who are able to take advantage of any of the other Medicaid waivers? Anyone from the Alaskans Living Independent waiver or the Home and Community Based waiver? Or is it just 1115 waiver that you've been able to leverage to date?
I'd say the home and community based one, yes, because people get PCA services.
Those are waiver services, but you've been able to leverage Medicaid PCA services, great.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, cool.
So
Yeah,
for those that are not familiar in the room, can you guys like explain maybe just like the brief, like maybe the 3 sentence of what like an 1115 or whatever else the things that you said? Because I think there are 63 people on and not everyone has the skill set that you all do or knowledge. So just real quick, if you don't mind, thanks. And I can't explain it, and I'm not going to. I just want to put that out there.
Sam, you got it, or you want me?
I can try 1115. So there are Medicaid services that I would say there's like federally required, and then there's our state add-on ones. Some people might remember like dental is an optional one that our state doesn't have to do, but they add on. And then 1115 is a way that the state asks the federal government if we can try new things. And so intensive case management, where someone has a severe mental illness or substance use disorder, is in this demonstration category of being able to provide intensive case management services that are often through some of our behavioral health organizations. The other ones, I don't think I can explain.
I'll
Just,
jump on that a little bit just to say that one of the things, and many of you are talking with your state legislators and your, your great advocates. These programs are available because Alaska expanded our Medicaid program. And I believe that the people that we're serving in Home for Good are people who previously could not access that basic health service in the state. And so people end up in these horrible situations where they have unmet medical needs. You see by the rate of people who have medical transports in the program that this is the result of not having access to basic health care. And so this behavioral health piece is a part of that Medicaid expansion. So if those words come up in any conversations with any elected official, I really encourage you strongly to say that Medicaid expansion has been such a benefit for our state, and we need to protect it and, stay on that.
And just to piggyback on what Nancy said, the 1115 waiver is set to expire at the end of 23. So that need to protect and hopefully enlarge is pretty immediate, should you be informing a member of the legislature.
Hopefully it's demonstrated some success and they add those services to the state plan. We have a hand up online. As you can tell, there's some folks who really dork out on Medicaid in here.
Thanks. Liam.
Hi, this is Liam. Sorry, I'm very late to this whole thing, but the home and community-based waiver is in a very simplistic view of it. It is for people who meet a nursing facility level of care. So anybody, even though they have great struggles with things, they need to meet a nursing facility level of care to be qualified for that waiver. So they need help with ambulating, bed mobility, transfers, toileting, and putting food into their own mouths. That's a very, very short version of that.
I would agree that's a very, very simplistic version of that. I would say they need lots and lots of help and with activities of daily living. And we do see clients who've experienced homelessness who are trying to get into housing that would be able to leverage that to be able to live in the community still, short of assisted living homes. So that was why I asked.
And Liam, other people don't know where you're from, but Liam is with South Central Foundation. So great to see you, Liam.
Any more PSH specific questions? I do have some numbers I want to share with you all.
I have one more question about the slide, or not really a question, but an observation. One of your slides talks about the reductions in like people going to emergency services. One is the reductions for emergency shelter. And I noticed it wasn't zero, and would really like to have, or at least say something, and then it could be a conversation if it needs to be or not. But I'm feeling like one of the reasons it isn't zero, because we're having this conversation often, which is, well, we house such and such. Why are they back at BFS? Why are they back at Sullivan? Their community is there, their friends are there, their routine is there. And I think, I hope that everyone kind of understands that just because we have housed Johnny today doesn't mean that Johnny is not going to go back to some of those same services and resources that Johnny has been using for months or years or decades. And that's okay. That is a part, because at some point, Johnny can go back home and has a place to stay. So I just want to say that number to me is amazing. And I hope that we're having that conversation. I can't tell you how many people I used to house that would go back down. And I'm like, you have a bed. Yeah, Sharia, but I wanted to stay over here. It's quiet. I'm like, okay, I'll get you a TV. Got the TV. And there's some like, well, what happened? Well, I just, I want to be here. And they didn't bring 5 people to their house. I was like, you know what? That's a win. You don't have people there. Okay, you want to go spend the night down there? Sounds great. But it is a great conversation and a perspective to change all of our minds. Sorry.
Yeah, I would think that when you have those friends come over, those are another resource about why people are looking outside. Why can't we engage with those folks too? And they're talking about here about there's a bridge needing to get built Once we start building that bridge of communication between people and seeing that's like equal, if you would had been in where they were, there you would be the same place. And really understand location, start really understanding location and how people have to navigate those things. And then we can start figuring out how to leverage it together and make some change together, because there's a huge justice issue here, and it's just really so visible here about how history has brought us here. And like everyone's thinking about my answers has brought this problem here. This is a big deal. You know, and it's like having those little conversations and perspectives and start really document those things, having a different strategy, because we don't change until we start realizing the problem is people, not the houses, not the machineries, but people are using those machines. People invented those machines. People are doing this thing together. Like, how do we go get like everybody to that page somewhere? Like, you're located here, this is your perspective. Other people have a totally different perspective. It's valid, just same as yours, you know, like, how do we get there? And that's,
No,
one.
thank you, thank you.
Almost forgot what I was gonna say. Thank you, Terry. Your passion is just palpable. I can, yeah, every time you speak, I just feel it. I think I was gonna say something along the lines of what you were saying. Okay. Oh, yeah, I knew it was there. Just about, you know, when people come back for services or, you know, have housing, but come back for services or leave their housing. Just so much of what we see at Awake is, you know, a safety factor of things, right? So sometimes you get people housed and shortly after their housing no longer is safe for them to stay there. So then they're emergency, you know, having to be displaced from their home due to whatever their safety situation is. So really just, again, I know we've kind of all said this in so many different ways, but looking, you know, past the situation, looking at the person and their needs and tailor making how we approach what they want and what their goals is towards their situation and how they want to approach their own situation. But still being open and not holding it against them that, you know, we just got you housed and here you are again receiving services. You know, it is a continuous thing, and there's so many moving pieces and factors as to why someone has barriers to housing, why someone leaves their housing, you know, or makes the choice to leave their housing, right? Because sometimes it's not a choice. But I just wanted to put my 2 cents in and say that just to share.
Jessica, well.
Just kind of echoing some of that, but also I think that comes almost full circle to that conversation about how important it is to have a great relationship with the landlord. Because if somebody has something going on in their housing situation that is causing them to not feel safe or not feel comfortable, you have to be able to have those honest conversations with the landlord about what is needed and what will make that housing successful. And then also that same way, building that relationship with, you know, the person you're helping, that talking to them, you know, I noticed you stayed down at the Sullivan last night. Can you tell me what's going on? What can we do? Maybe a solution for that person is going to be moving to a different house. You know, maybe there is something so traumatizing about that unit that they just can't be there in there anymore. And I think it brings to light this challenge of uprooting people from a community and putting them into a new community in a way that is really hard to overcome, because we can't, if we have a vacant unit, we can't hold it waiting for there to be 2 more units so 3 people can move in together. Like, you know, you don't always get that option. You can't let that unit stay vacant. So how can we do that? How can we build not just the community that is at that PSH site, but the larger community where people who are in PSH at different sites or scattered site model can have opportunities to come together and engage in these types of events where they can be together still, and it just may not be in the same housing.
I think this might be one of the great opportunities for the resource centers that are coming online. You know, it's a resource center. It's a resource center if you're housed or you're unhoused. It's a place where community can be. So I think that, you know, the extent that we can provide that influence to the new ones that are opening up, we will certainly try to do so. Yeah, well,
That is built into the design of the Third Avenue Resource and Navigation Center. Just having walked through it recently, that was consciously
Right.
incorporated.
Thank you for previewing.
Bring things up to like a higher level for a second. So yesterday, like the permanent supportive housing was identified as like, you know, a core need. And then Jessica and Sam both like presented some of like the data on how it can even save money and like some of the great results. So what are the biggest limiting factors to increasing permanent supportive housing, and how do we identify, how do we?
Yeah, we can put units online kind of all day long with capital costs. It's operating dollars. The pool is somewhat fixed and it's multiple years away. So like the COC funding that we administer is already, the next funding round is for 2025. And so it's far out, and there's much, much more demand than there is need. And then a little bit like when we talked with the secretary, the allocation of HUD resources to Anchorage is based on the fact that we live in a small state, not based on the need and the proportional need to our population. So, for example, we got Treasury as part of COVID, it issued emergency housing vouchers. They're amazing. But we have all of them in shopping, and we still have 200 unsheltered people and, you know, 500 plus people who live in emergency shelter. We would love to have 700 more vouchers. We have a similar number of people experiencing homelessness as just slightly under like what Atlanta has. Atlanta has hundreds of vouchers. And so you see where there's that disconnect. And it's those kinds of resources. Partly because those vouchers come with the capacity to get supportive services in addition to that. And so there's just these moving pieces, getting them all to align at the right time in order to increase capacity is really, really hard.
Yeah, I think it would be really helpful if there was mechanisms put into place to have people who are not impacted by this benefit to be impacted by the results of this, because this is costing the state money. If there's lots of the law spent and Medicaid spent on people doing these emergencies over and over and over, and the cost to families who are members of the police department, those are costs as well, because people doing police work that is not related to catching thieves damage, but doing this enforcing and ticketing houseless people, that weighs in on their esteem at their job, because they don't want to do that. That's not why they signed up to be a police people. And it's like all these different costs that are coming into the municipality and the families of local people here. Where do we put those mechanisms on people who are not impacted by that? Because their income is a little wider, it's out of state, or it's distantly connected to just turning their properties over. Where do we create mechanisms so they feel the impact of their behavior, how it impacts our state? I don't know if that's a possibility, but that goes into another legal political realm. And I think those are really important things to consider. It's like, how are you living here? You're making money here. You got to give here. If you're just taking it, get out of town. You know, that's a lot of that question that I have, like what's going on here?
I would also toss out there, I don't know if you know this or not, but Anchorage isn't a very friendly town to new permanent supportive housing being built.
We're going to change that though. We are in some ways, you know, I think having the Home for Good overlay at Guest House, it went in with fairly little fanfare, particularly compared to what it took to stand up Carlos Manor. And similarly doing it at the undisclosed property, disclosed property in Spinard.
Barrett Inn.
There we go.
Formerly known as the Barrett Inn on Spinard should be online in a couple months under the ownership of the Anchorage Affordable Housing and Land Trust. And probably before that, there will be another undisclosed property available that we hope to close on at the trust in a week or so.
Yeah, so we are seeing the shift in some ways, the acuteness of visible homelessness in our community has said, oh, and I think we've made great progress. We hear it over and over. The solution to homelessness is housing. So speaking of, let's talk a little bit about the housing need as we get ready to wrap up here. So we'll soon be putting the gap analysis, an annual housing needs inventory we have to do as the continuum of care. It'll be before the advisory council this month for them to approve. But preliminarily, I want to do tell you a few things. One, we both capture the need for any additions to year-round permanent shelter capacity, and that includes transitional housing because it does fall under that shelter definition for HUD. And that number coming into the new year is about 200. These are permanent year-round beds, not accounting for any winter surge or additional needs in the winter. Then we break down the housing into 3 categories: rapid rehousing, supportive housing, and independent folks that could self-resolve with some help maybe in navigation. These 3 numbers are not independent of one another. They're cumulative. So an independent housing unit could also be a scattered site PSH unit. So, but the total number we are saying are needed for housing units in our community is about 2,100, just over 2,100. And they break down roughly just over about 580 as rapid rehousing, 620 as supportive housing, and just over 975 as independent housing. It's a lot of housing. We have a lot of housing to go. So when people start to quibble about which housing, I'm like, I don't care which housing, just housing, because then we can start matching people. Obviously, you know, as the continuum of care with coordinated entry, we want to go from the top down, most vulnerable, but a housing unit is a housing unit. We're not going to say, no, I'm sorry, we're not really interested in that housing opportunity. It's only 6 units when we have 2,100 to go. We'll take every single housing unit as part of the solution. So that's why your participation here these last 2 days has been so important, because we need to be talking about housing. I think we get caught up in the immediate needs of individuals, and that the problem of homelessness is knotty and sticky and it's hard to untangle. The solution is housing, and we've got to have these conversations about how to leverage our resources to get people into housing and then help keep them in housing. So yeah, just
When you say independent units, do you mean affordable?
low income units and self-resolution. Not just, not a $5,000 a month, like.
Although that helps, I'm not gonna lie, all housing helps, but.
Yeah, no, we did it specify low income and the things available for self-resolution. Some of those self-resolution units as well could be where family agrees and those sorts of things. Which 2,100, based on the data from December, like fully encapsulate everyone we've got in the HMIS system. It's about 1,900 in December. Our data is about months.
And although that is a large number, it should not feel like a daunting number. Every community has a problem with their housing inventory. Every state, every county, everybody is having the same issue. The positive thing, though, that has happened in the last year is a lot of folks, including our state legislators, are really gaining traction on the thing to solve homelessness is housing. And so we've seen that with the Affordable Housing Trust come online. We've seen that with the guest house, these other new hotel conversions. Those are things that other communities have done to really increase their housing inventory on a short, like at a very fast timeline, because building things cost a lot of money. You'll hear cooking, let's say it doesn't pencil well when it comes to low income or affordable housing. So doing these hotel conversions is a way to like, hey, we have these buildings that are being utilized and it can work. And it works utilizing CE. A lot of folks complain about CE, but CE should be the gateway into housing. So that way we are prioritizing those needs and also looking at those individual subpopulations of those persons experiencing homelessness. We want to help those that need PSH. We want to help those that just want independent housing. We want to help veterans. We want to help all of these things. And you can do that when you own the property and say, 29 units go to Home for Good, 15 units go for veterans, 30 units go to EHVs, or whatever your compilation is of that property creates a community unto itself. And then they just blossom and go forth. So hopefully we get updates later this year about like guest house, because it'll be a year in June, yeah, I was gonna say July.
July became transitional housing, September when it became permanent
But
housing.
a lot of those folks from July are still there and they're still housed, so it'd be great to see if everybody has made it to the July.
So there's a lot of momentum in this community right now, and I think that's good. I'll say, I think we're on the right track talking about housing. I think Margaret from HUD, when she spoke, you know, the federal government is seeing the need for housing, coming out with new products. So again, I want to make some space. We're at the end of our time. Does anyone have any closing comments they'd like to share? I will send out the after summit resources, probably just a short evaluation. We plan to hold several more of these this year focused on topics. So we would love your feedback so we can plan accordingly. So I'll pause there. Any comments, closing remarks, thoughts? Yep, please go ahead, Dave.
Yes, hello. Thank you. So I just had a quick question as far as, because we all came to the same conclusion that it's the housing that we need. And I know right now we're relying heavily on landlords whose business model is not to house, our homeless population, is to, house everyone as a whole and to make revenue. So if building is not the option because building is costly, and permitting takes a while and zoning, I guess my question for you all is, what is the barrier for us to take some of these vacant buildings or some of these hotels and redevelop them for housing? Because that seems like it would be the most cost-effective way to solve the permanent housing problem. What is the barrier that is keeping us from doing that?
Dave, you ask a great question and one that is a lot to untangle, but we can help give you some resources that we've relied on. Can make sure you drop your email into the chat and I'll make sure Robert captures it and I'll reach out to you because we had a team here that worked on these 3 hotel conversions and a hotel conversion into a complex care shelter, 2 of which came on in 6 to 8 months from conception to being on. So we definitely can share some things that we thought about with you.
Okay, yeah, that'd be helpful because we're coming from New York, and there are a lot of investors who have capital who want to invest in something like this, but they just don't know how, and they don't know what to do. So it'd be really helpful to have that, so I can start talking to some people and just see what we can do to help out. Besides the government funding, see what we can do on our side, outside of that. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other closing comments? It is now 2 o'clock. We won't keep you. Again, our sincerest thanks. We have been so happy to host this conversation. I think we took away a ton ourselves as well. And we're just really privileged to get to do this work alongside all of you. So thank you so much. We'll follow up and have a great weekend and be safe.
Bye.